Hello, my name is Aaron Cavanagh and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief of Post-burnout.com. Post-burnout.com is a culture website dedicated to venerating burnt-out artists the world over. This is our website's podcast where we publish full-length recordings of our interviews, which are sometimes the unedited versions of our site's articles and at other times are exclusives. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back, and if this is your first time listening, thank you for checking us out. We hope you enjoy and consider subscribing, giving the episodes a thumbs up if you're on YouTube, or giving it a rating if you're anywhere else. It really helps us out. Thank you. Alright, in this edition of Post-burnout.com interviews, we talk with drummer Blake Fleming of the Mars Volta and Dazzling Killmen fame in the first half. Last Tuesday, Blake dropped the physical version of his latest record, The Be Fantastic. Blake discusses the record, his book, The Book of Rhythm, storytelling through percussion, and how his solo work differs from his work with the band. In the second half, we talk with the Missouri singer-songwriter Ian Fisher about his upcoming album Go Gentle, which examines bereavement after the loss of his mother. We also discuss his time between Missouri, Vienna and Toronto and how those influence his music, and his thoughts as a student of politics and the current state of affairs across the world. Hey Blake, how's it going? Can you hear me okay?
Hi. Hi, Aaron. You can hear me and see me okay?
I can hear and see you perfectly.
All right. Excellent. Yep. Same for me.
Perfect. I'll try to take up too much of your time, man. It's really nice to meet you. I guess the first thing I was going to talk about was a little bit about your background. I don't want to get too much into like a biographical thing necessarily, but to kind of give the condensed version, my understanding is, you kind of grew up in a musical household with parents who were listening to 50s rock and roll, and then you had one brother who was into prog rock and another who was into kind of punk and new wave, which was kind of burgeoning at the time. At eight, at eight you started taking drum lessons properly. You played in a local fife and drum corps and played at Ronald Reagan's birthday. Is all that correct so far?
That is correct. Yes. You've been doing
Okay.
some research. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's only the tip. But yeah, I mean, obviously, like since then, you went on, you formed, Dazzling Killmen, and your kind of career just sort of went from there. I mean, for I guess like 3 decades now at this point, you've been kind of involved in the sort of noise rock, kind of math rock scene, however you want to put that, the kind of post-hardcore scene, and but the music you're doing now, the solo music, is kind of a departure from that. My understanding is this kind of solo project began after you embarked on a tour with the Mars Volta in support of Red Hot Chili Peppers on their Stadium Arcadium tour. And after that tour, you decided you wanted to kind of do something completely different. What was kind of impetus, I guess, for the style of music you're doing now versus the style of music that kind of made you famous to whatever extent you accept that label?
um, I think part of the reason I made my first solo record is I had a practice space. I had a little bit of recording equipment. It was very bare bones. But I had some time and some space to start messing around and just recording ideas.
Yeah.
And at that point, you know, post all of the big three bands that I'm sort of known for, Mars Volta, Dazzling Killmen, and Ladio Balaco. After all of that, it wasn't like I hadn't quit playing with other people.
Mhm.
Um, but I took some time um, to kind of figure out some things on my own a little bit, and what I wanted to do musically. And um, it was a lot easier to work on my own than trying to work with other people. Part of it was just logistics. I had
Mhm.
moved up to the Catskill Mountains from New York City, and my wife and I were, kind of isolated a little bit, which we wanted at the time.
Yeah.
It was very beneficial in a lot of ways. Um, and I think I had wanted to make a solo record for a while. I've always wanted to do things like I love collaborating with people, and I loved being in bands when it worked, but I've always wanted to do things on my own as well, like
Yeah.
just to see you know, I'm still doing a lot of, I guess, self-discovery in a way, and just, especially artistically, just to see, like, what's in there,
Yeah.
what's in there and what wants to come out.
Hmm.
Um, and, yeah, 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 part of it was just, like I said, logistics and a desire, and then, also being kind of in between, bigger sort of projects in a way, and and perhaps at that time being, residing up in the mountains,
Hmm.
wanting to go for more of a simpler existence, and so doing something on my own kind of was serving that purpose. And so, with uh, the benefit of multi-tracking, shout out to Les Paul there and anybody else who contributed to that.
Yeah.
uh, we can make records on our own,
Yeah.
um, and that's what I started doing. And I think initially I probably didn't have the idea to make a record. I was just chasing ideas, and I would find things that worked, and then I would start to build onto that. And then after a while, kind of zooming out a little bit and getting a more macro view, I started to realize, oh, there is something to this material here.
Mhm.
Perhaps I will cobble it into something like an album. And then, with my son was going to be born in it was November 2012. I wanted to have the solo record done, so I had sort of a little bit of a timeline to work with because my wife got pregnant, and I wanted to have that done and out, ideally,
Yeah.
before all that, because I knew my life was going to get busy and change in some sort of way. Um, no matter what I tried to do, it was,
Yeah.
life was coming for me
Actually,
at
I
that
have to
point.
ask, sorry, not to interrupt, but
No, no,
just like when
please.
you have that kind of like fixed deadline, as you mentioned there, you're trying to get it out before the birth of your son. Do you find that that kind of like aids in your creative process in the sense that you don't have time to like second guess yourself or to doubt what you're doing? You have to kind of just perpetually move forward, or did you actually find having that kind of strict deadline to be a hindrance to the project?
Yeah. No, because the deadline was soft. It was my deadline,
Yeah, sure.
So, and I think that when it was all said and done, um, because I remember the day that the records came and got delivered to my house, he was there because we took pictures of him with the record. So,
Yeah.
so the deadline had gotten pushed a little bit, but I wanted,
Sure.
I think, all the recording process and that sort of stuff to be done before that.
Mm.
And I think I managed to do most of that. To address your question though, yeah, I think sometimes, when we do limit ourselves or we give ourselves deadlines, it definitely can push us in good directions. I know that, Jack White purposely worked that way a lot, especially with the White Stripes, and it was a
Yeah.
very sort of reductionist sort of approach to what they were doing. And yeah, I think that can be very beneficial sometimes because especially nowadays, you can sort of spin endlessly on your own stuff if you want, and it's very easy to become very non-committal,
Mhm.
you know. So having some sort of deadline, whether it be made up or not, can be good. So yes, I would say that that definitely helped me though in that process for sure.
Do you ever struggle with things like procrastination?
Sure,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, I'm a regular person like anybody else, and um, I think that I think maybe the difference is though is that I will procrastinate to a degree, but then that builds up and becomes an
Yeah.
ass kicking.
Yeah.
And then I get into work mode and I start doing stuff. And I can only do it for so long.
Hmm.
And then there's like some sort of sense of guilt or like impending doom or
Yeah.
something like that
Yeah.
that pushes me forward. Yeah, yeah,
No,
yeah.
'cause
So sorry, go ahead.
no, no, because I could say like, definitely I think when you have kind of self-determination like that, you're because like working as a freelancer, I find that like, days can certainly bleed together, and then suddenly you're like, oh crap, that was like, 2 weeks ago I was meant to have that, or you can definitely fall back on when you have to determine your own thing. So I do think like things like deadlines and being like, okay, I have this out by then can be beneficial, but like you said, I mean, when you have to play by your own deadlines, they can be very soft.
Yeah, but I think what works for me more so is just this sort of like, in a way, it's like an existential malaise from the passing of time, you
Yeah.
know, and the pressure that one can feel just from the passing of time, especially as I get older. I'm going to be 52 this year, which is completely crazy to me. I mean, I'm glad to be, living to be older, quote unquote. I hope to be much older, but it's also crazy to be 52 at the same time when I'm still sort of like, the cliche, I'm like 15 or 16, 17, 18, something like that in my mind.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, the passing of time and the way that it sort of speeds up as we get older definitely pushes me to want to put things out there more, you
Mhm.
know. Um, I tell you, before I just finished doing the fundraising process to pay for the record, which knock on wood, it was successful. I did a Kickstarter campaign. We raised all the money
Mhm.
to reimburse what I put into the manufacturing of the record. That's quite a slog right there, man. It's,
Yeah.
it's a pretty tough process, and you know, I have a couple other records that I'm working on, like solo ideas that I've been working on for a few months. And I started trying to think about the idea of maybe trying to put out an album like every year and a half. Every
Mhm.
year would be ideal, really, but I don't think I can manage because I do it all on my own, basically. And it's a lot of work, and plus, you know, got to be able to have the money, or it's a lot harder to fundraise as well when
Yeah.
you've just did a fundraising project, say like the year before that,
Mhm.
ask
Totally.
again. So um, I imagine there'll be a little more space, but I definitely want it to be. I don't want there to be more than 10 years in between solo efforts that I put out, like physically, like as a vinyl record. I want that window to be smaller for sure. But yeah, the passing of time, man, is kind of freaks me out sometimes. It really
Totally.
does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, it smells like it might be a weird thing, and I don't know if you focus on this too, but like, for someone like yourself who has like such a sizable discography, both as a solo artist and with different projects, the actual album titles often in parentheses have the year of release beside them. I don't know if that's something that kind of like freaks you out when you look back and you go like, wow, like the kind of like the amount of stuff I did, because like particularly I think we kind of like when you look at your discography, I think between the years 1995 and 97, the amount of stuff you did between then, like you moved from Chicago to Tokyo to New York, and you were in three different projects, one coming to an end, and then another begin. Well, one you joined it, and then another, then you began another project, and it seems like such like I don't know, like such a vast amount of stuff that happened in such a short period. I don't know if you kind of like look back at that and go Jesus, or you kind of go, no, that feels about right.
Yeah, no, I mean, it does feel about right because, I'm much younger, during those times. You're tied to nothing.
Yeah.
Maybe I had a girlfriend, maybe,
Hmm.
but that was it, and I
Yeah.
lived for music, especially back then. I was way out of balance,
Yeah.
but in a really good way. As it's much easier to do in your 20s and 30s, and some people continue a lifetime of that. I've tried to become a little more balanced, but I mean, here I am still trying to do it. So, but I think part of it had to do with just the audacity of youth.
Hmm.
Just being a young bugger with pissed off and needing to say something.
Hmm.
I definitely still feel that way for sure. I'm still kind of angsty, and and because it's never been super easy for me.
Hmm.
Um, but that's kind of a whole other thing. But getting busy during those certain periods is, yeah. I mean, part of it is just the youth of it. Also, just being immersed in a scene, being in the middle of it. Like the more that you're out there and doing stuff, you meet other people, you start doing stuff with them, and it just sort of, you know, um, everything sort of connects in that way, and then other times, like, like I live in a place where there's not a big music scene. I mean, there is a pretty decent scene here, actually, where I live, being isolated up here, in the mountains. But um, it's not like living, like I was living around. I never lived in Chicago, but I spent a lot of
Okay.
time there. I grew up around the St. Louis area, but on the Illinois side of the river.
Mhm.
And then the Tokyo element, I never lived in Tokyo, or I've actually never been to Japan, but I played
Oh,
with
really? Sorry, I got that
Japanese bands
information
in
wrong.
Igeva. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I played with the Japanese bands in Igeva, but when they came to the States and they toured,
Okay.
I was friends with those guys from when they used to play with Dazzling Killmen back in the day,
Yeah.
back in the early 90s. Um, but, I think that also there's been various periods throughout my life when I've been super busy. I mean, there was just a few years ago, I was really, really, really busy again. Um, but it was, making a record that never came out so far. But it was something that we were working on for 4 or 5 months, and but it never got publicized or anything, and but there was very concentrated effort going on, and it kind of, you know, with a freelance sort of artistic lifestyle that I have, it just kind of comes and goes. It ebbs and it
Yeah.
flows, really, And but I think part of what you're talking about is just because there was just you know, the scene was just happening back in those time periods, and there was just, I don't know. I mean, the scenes used to be a lot more galvanized, and there used to be real scenes. And I think that the internet actually, for as much as it was supposed to quote unquote bring people together, it sort of shattered things in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
Like small town scenes. Like no one goes out anymore. Everyone's on their fucking phone or doing some stupid bullshit.
Yeah.
Like um, I was lucky enough to be of the age where I grew up before all that, and where kids put on shows in like basements of churches or like at VFW halls or just in somebody's house or at fucking apartments sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
literally, and you just did it because you wanted to. And there was
Yeah.
people there, and there was all this momentum, right? There was like this energy
Yeah.
there. But yeah, I mean, I hope to have periods like that in my life still. I mean, I'm still clawing at it, man. That's why I'm still putting stuff out. I'm
Yeah.
like, ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Sorry, I
Yeah. I
kind of
mean,
gave you more of an answer there, but yeah,
no, 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 not at all. Yeah, I mean, there is a lot to like go on there, and I think actually one thing that's interesting is you were mentioning kind of like, the kind of the music scenes back then versus now, and I sometimes think like a lot of the times there's a consideration now more so for the aesthetics of DIY and the aesthetics of like basement shows or something to kind of like look cool or interesting on social media rather than an organic sense of like people just doing this because like that's how you put on a show. Like you want to put on a show and you don't have access to a venue.
yes, no, we're so interested in Instagrammy moments now and all this like
Yeah.
superficial bullshit that it's like, it's the same thing as like, going to Hot Topic and getting your shirt is not punk rock.
Yeah.
If you're 14 and that's all you got, and that is your element to be punk rock, then more power to you, absolutely. But that's not where it came from. It wasn't born in the mall.
Hmm.
It was like the jeans used to be ripped because that's all people could afford to wear. We just wore thrift store clothing because we were literally fucking poor bohemian artists. I mean, I lived in my practice spaces,
Yeah.
literally. I took sponge baths. I lived with rats. I
Yeah.
slept in vans. I mean, there was no posing. It was completely real.
Yeah.
And that's the thing that, man, there's so many kids and young artists today that are not going to get elements like that because it's so slick.
Hmm.
Like because everything is so related to video and the visual, and it's got to get you in like just a few seconds.
Right.
That there's so much bullshit out there now.
Yeah.
It's
No, totally.
really, you're inundated with it, and you're depressed because of it, and you're like, there's so many kids that don't know where to turn, and like, thank God I grew up in a time when I can remember when, I guess I can put it that way. And
Yeah.
they're still like, a friend of mine tells me that, like in Syracuse, New York, which is about an hour and a half north of where I live here in New York, there's still scene. There's like a good hardcore punk rock scene there. Like kids come out to shows. Like there's a real scene. You'll get like 200 kids because there'll be a few bands that showed up from out of town that no one knows, but
Yep.
everybody will come, right?
Hmm.
I love that stuff, man. But
Yeah.
there's so much apathy nowadays because of the fucking technology. you
No,
know?
totally, I agree, and I think also, like, again, people are inundated with choices too. It's like, I don't know, like, there's just, like, so much kinda, like, going on, and it's like, I don't know, like, sort of being able to go to, like, a local show isn't really an event anymore. It's sort of a triviality, and I talk to, like, local artists from different scenes, and it's kind of the same thing where you kinda get people who are from kinda, like, bigger, places, and the issue is, like, well, people aren't really appreciative of gigs, but if you play the kind of more smaller enclaves, it seems to be people kinda actually do turn out and kind of, like, are appreciative of someone actually taking the time to come to their town or their village or however big it is, you know?
Absolutely. I mean, man, those have been some of the best shows in my career in general have been where you just pull up in some town like, "Okay, is
Yeah.
anybody even gonna come to this?" And all of a sudden like, in whether it be in Europe or in the States, like these little places, like, it's happened in places like Slovenia or like,
Mhm,
like Missoula, Montana. I mean, Missoula is a college town, but still like it's pretty isolated, and you're a band that really no one knows coming through. You don't know how it's going to go. And then sometimes those nights are just freaking magical.
mhm,
The ones that are really intimate and really small like that, where
yeah,
the people are really doing it because they love music and they love that scene and the community of it, and the need to express oneself in some way and to let off some steam and to like, yeah, and to cut all the posing and then all that like, yeah, yeah, it's a really weird world that we live in,
yeah. No,
just these
totally.
it's fucking weird, like, you're, like, out and there's, like, all these people, like, taking pictures of themselves all the time and stuff, I'm just like, "Wow, this really can't be good for you after a while," you know? What a fucking
Sure.
distraction you are to yourself, you know?
Mhm. I think also, like, if you're not indulging in that, you're kind of like, cutting yourself out of the game in a way because, like, I find, like, when you talk to people who use social media, no one really likes it necessarily. Like people just kind of see it as a necessary evil.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like I don't know. But if you're not on like TikTok or Instagram or Spotify and stuff, like it feels like your reach is limited. But I don't know. I think it's weird. Everyone kind of agrees on the kind of superficiality of it all, but people are too afraid to kind of go against the grain.
Yeah, I took, about maybe 14 months or so, off of social media.
Mhm.
I just got back on a few months ago. And I tell you, it was hard to get back on. There was a number of times I attempted. I was like, okay, today I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a post. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. And I was
Yeah.
just like, what? I didn't want to invite. There's a lot of good people out there that I keep in touch with, but there's like this element that you invite back into your life when you engage in that way.
Mhm.
That's got this, um, it's very random in some ways because you don't know what's gonna, it's like a fucking slot machine, like going through your feed sometimes. You don't
Yeah.
know what you're gonna see. Like some of it sets you off sometimes and like, unfortunately can ruin your day or something. That's a
Yeah.
real drag. And it,
Mhm.
it upsets me how easily manipulated the human mind is, as well. And I definitely try to reinforce myself against that because I know that we are being attacked on a daily basis,
Mhm.
constantly, constantly, constantly. It's psychic warfare out there. But I I've been on social media and I've been off of social media and I'm back on it again. And it is a necessary evil for independent artists.
Right.
And again, it's not all evil. Obviously, there are some good people that you end up being in touch with that you may not be in touch with. Um, But then we also know all the pitfalls because we've all experienced them to some degree. So I do it, cautiously and with trepidation, but nonetheless, I still do it because frankly, I got a record to promote.
Yeah, yeah.
You
No,
know?
totally.
And then after that, I got a book that I wrote that I still need to promote more because I have
Yeah,
more to sell, and I got that needs to be an evergreen sort of thing. And
yeah.
I have a lot of things that I need social media for, so I'm gearing up myself mentally to be able to do it and not wreck myself again and get like depressed or something of that matter, because
Mhm.
it's real thin ice sometimes.
Yeah. No, totally. And I think one of the and this goes beyond just like musicians or people who are promoting stuff, but I think like one thing that can really kind of affect people's minds is like engagement and interaction, where it's like, people just feel like shit if they're not getting what they feel is the right amount of likes, the right amount of clicks, the right amount of shares. And it's like I don't know, I think that kind of stuff just isn't good for your health.
No, no. Listen, I I told you I did a Kickstarter campaign to raise the money for this record, which was successful. We did it in 3 weeks. The day that I launched, so you got to understand, like I'm an independent artist. I do things a lot on my own. I put things out on my own. They have to be of a certain level. They've got to
Mhm.
be very professional. It can't be like, oh, this is pretty good. No, no, no. Fuck that. It's got to be. I got to compete on the international stage. Is how I look at anything that I do that I put out there.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, so I am like bleeding over every little word that went into my Kickstarter campaign. I wanted to make everything just right, like the pricing of the rewards and what rewards and how many of each and how am I going to present my story and like all this stuff. Like what's the art we're going to? I mean, there's a lot that goes into this, right?
Mhm.
And so it's a painstaking process. So the day comes, I'm going to launch, and I'm going to launch on a Tuesday morning because Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays are the best times to launch.
Yeah.
That's when people are like, if they're at work, they're still kind of fucking around on their phones or on the computer and that kind of thing, and they're not distracted. They're not going into the weekend. They're not hungover from the weekend like on
Mhm.
Monday, or they're not excited about the weekend like on Friday. You kind of have them in this like 3-day period. Tuesday I found to be the best. So I think about all this stupid shit like this that I don't want to think about, but
Mhm.
you have to, right? So I make my post for it, which is again just making the post like on Facebook, like to let people know I haven't put a record out in like over 10 years, right?
Mhm.
A physical product like this. So I make the post, I put it out there. I do it around 10 a.m. Eastern time, which is like, okay, that's usually the time that kind of gets, people are just waking up on the West Coast. There's all this thought that goes into it. I put it out there, fucking crickets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tumbleweeds, fucking crickets. I'm sitting here fucking looking at this thing, which I never do, but because I was launching that, I did. I'm like, you gotta be fucking kidding me.
Mhm.
After 52 minutes, I had 5 likes. I took the motherfucker down. Fuck this. Fuck you. Whoa. I'm not even putting out this record. You know what? I already paid for it. It's coming. Fuck you. I'm not even putting it out. Like it
Mhm.
threw me in touch. I completely had a mental breakdown, like a
Yeah.
minor mental breakdown because I had set myself, because I thought that it was going to be at least a little bit better than that. You
Mhm.
know, it wasn't to the level of like I was a 40s Hollywood starlet from the silent movie era, and my
Yeah.
time had passed, and I thought they would come back and don't you love me still? You
Sunset
miss me.
Boulevard type.
Sunset, exactly. I felt
Yeah.
like I felt like I was the woman in Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
I'm not kidding. I had to recompose myself
Right.
through the aid of my wife and one of my good buddies, Dan Ainspan, who has helped me do a lot of these different tasks and projects for my career. And I got it back together, and I made a new post, and I put it
Mhm.
back up, and I launched because the clock was ticking already. I launched
Yeah.
it on Kickstarter. It was ticking. It didn't matter that that no one paid much attention to it that first time I did it. Okay, I put it back up, and I just said, you know what, buddy, you're gonna have to strap in because it's not gonna be like the first time you did it. Because the first time that I did this, it was my first solo record. I was getting ready to have a kid. There was all this stuff. I made like a cute little stupid video. Right, I got funded pretty quickly. This is post COVID. Right, this is everyone's attention is being vied for by everything in the world, and here I am with my niche little drum record, and I think that like, people are going to give a shit. Well, eventually people did give a shit, thank God, because it got
Mhm.
funded, and I do have some fans out there, but it was tough, man, initially. And I just say that because I'm super honest. I got nothing to hide. I'm a real open book when I talk about this stuff, like the failures and all that stuff. That really messed me up for a while. I almost thought I was going to pass out
Mhm.
because I was like so upset and I had nowhere to put it. I wasn't on tour. I'm not playing with some crazy loud band at the moment. It's me in my house having put all this work into this thing, and there was 5 fucking people that paid attention to it in the first hour. So I took
Mhm.
it down, freaked out, like, and then got my shit back together, made a new post,
Mhm.
put it back up, and just said, "Okay, strap in because boy, you're in for a bit of a bumpy ride."
Yeah.
And we made it, but it took up until the last few hours of the campaign to get there. So it was very different. It was very different. Um, and I think that the landscape in general for artists, I mean, I made a post about this recently that, with bands large and small canceling tours,
Yep. Yep.
the fact that my niche little drum record even got financed or funded is a fucking miracle.
Mhm.
I said that making the joke that I'm like some sort of like folk hero or something like this,
Yeah.
like in today's climate, but it's really true. And like, wow, there are a lot of bands who are very successful
Mhm.
that can't g- get it together financially to make it worthwhile to go on the road. That's where
Yeah,
we're at
it's
right now.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult thing
Rough.
too because I think like some artists have been kind of like taking advantage of like dynamic pricing and stuff like that to really screw over customers for like every penny, to just to see them on the road, and then like merch costs and things like that, and just
Mhm.
all the additional kind of like fees that hit people who just want to see a show. And then yeah, I mean like um it's strange because I think everyone has to kind of play into that kind of like mainstream kind of Live Nation-y sort of thing at some point, just see an act they want. And yet the independent route, it's the issue is kind of like, so much stuff kind of like vying for people's attention, and not even just music, but just kind of anything. Like even, a lot of people kind of just passively scroll through social media, not really looking at anything at all. And
Yeah.
even that's like it's not like you're competing with a different form of art. It's not like you're competing with different musicians or different or like movies or books or something. It's like you're competing with a news feed. It's
Yeah.
weird. It's weird.
Competing with the cultural void.
Yeah, yeah.
Or something, like that something really, megalithic. Um,
Do you think
but
the music industry, including the kind of the kind of top labels and all of that, do you think they kind of have a grasp on, from your perspective, do you think they have a grasp on how to appeal to people today, or do you think they're just kind of fumbling like everyone else is?
I think they're fumbling more than they used to,
Hmm.
for sure, for
Yeah.
sure. Because I mean, if you are Billie Eilish, Beyonce, Jay-Z, if you're somebody, Taylor, why would you be on a label? Just put out your own
Yeah.
fucking records. You
Yeah.
are. I mean, Taylor Swift is responsible for entire cities' economies. I mean, there's like entire, I mean, literally,
Hmm.
literally, she comes through and it changes the economy of certain
Yep.
towns and cities like in this world. It's insane, right? So there's uh, the suits in a way, like the powers that be from the majors and stuff. I mean, yeah, I think they don't know what the fuck is happening either. They're becoming less and less relevant to the conversation.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, I think there's not really much of it. You know, artists need a good booking agent if you're going to tour. You need a good booking agent.
Hmm.
You need if you're going to have a manager, that manager's got to have a lot of connections and not be a greedy douchebag.
Hmm.
You know, um, there's a lot of things that have to align. If you go through the old system is, I mean, not like I know that much about it. I've never been that much a part of it, but I've certainly
Hmm.
studied it and I've been in it to some degree. Um, it's a whole different game, yeah. And they still have an arm up just because they have you're institutionalized at that point, and in a sense of, you're grandfathered in,
Hmm.
but those relationships and everything are starting to change as well. It's very weird because so much of it is not even about, it's all so like fashion and superficiality, like so
Yeah.
much like that we're really, really losing our ability on a, I mean, we're losing our ability to grasp things that are more artistic in a way. Like you just have to do it on your own. There's no, there's a couple labels and stuff. There's still some things where you can be like, okay, hey, so and so put out a record. Skin Graft, is one of the
Yeah.
ones that's still doing it. Like where it's a label where people go, oh, hey, I'd never heard of this band, but this label put it out. I'm gonna go check this out, and I'll probably like it.
Yeah. Totally.
Um, it's cool because bands, labels like that have become more and more relevant. If
Hmm.
if you had the staying power like they have had, which is fucking tough, man, trust me, because I'm still here and it's not been easy. Um, the field has opened up a little bit more though,
Yeah. Yeah.
and all of a sudden the legacy for the fact that you have been here is starting to mean something a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, at least I hope it is.
Well, one thing I noticed, like, that you wouldn't really seen, like, 30 years ago stuff is artists actually licensing their music to to major labels. So it'd be like, if you look at like the copyright for, certain records, it won't be like, Sony releasing, it would be like licensed by artists to Sony releasing and stuff like that. I think that's like a really positive kind of change. But like you were saying, yeah, it is probably best just to cut out the middleman at some point. Just, well, I think that's what Metallica did, right? I mean, they were on various labels for years, and then they bought their thing, but it's very expensive too. Like you have to kind of be at like, if you're getting if you're you have to be of a certain level of success, I think, to buy back your own discography. If you're dealing with the major label system, that is,
Yeah,
which is pretty sad.
and Metallica, I mean, they have their own pressing plant.
Yeah.
As well. They bought what used to be Furnace Manufacturing. Furnace is the manufacturer that did my first solo record, Time's
Hmm.
Up. And when I was starting to shop around for manufacturers for the new one, the Beat Fantastic, um, I came across Furnace, and upon reading, I was like, oh wait, I think they're still doing some stuff, but they're mainly, it's like that's Metallica's, you know, vinyl record manufacturing plant. They have their own plant now. So yeah, you've got to be, um, if you are on that level, then yeah, you should be doing it completely independently. I mean, like, the same way that Jack White does it and all of that. It just doesn't make any sense to do it otherwise. Those days are long, long gone, decades
Yeah.
gone, that ended in the 90s,
Yeah.
you know.
And I
Uh,
think, yeah, like the first thing, like at least in my lifetime, that I kind of like noticed in terms of like a paradigm shift was like Napster and things like that, where again you just see like the kind of I just think like the old system just hasn't really adapted to the internet age at all, and I don't think anyone who's honest with themselves can say they really know either what's gonna, how to kind of have a bona fide hit in these days. I think a lot of it is kind of arbitrary, which is probably about as equal a playing field as you can get compared to them when like literally you could just buy yourself to number one on radio stations. I guess you can still do that technically, but I don't know. I think everything has become kind of decentralized, like how we listen to music,
mhm.
how we get information, how like just anything. I don't think we have the kind of centralized sort of radio programs or television programs that we once had. I think everyone's kind of off in their own corner doing their own thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, we can all get some sort of information en masse to
Yeah.
our phones that will affect all of us at the same time. Like
Yeah.
that is a very weird, 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 as much as we, yes, very much can be off in our own corners, we also can be roped in together really quickly. Like 2 minutes hate. Here's something to get
Yeah.
really angry about all
Yeah.
this, right? And all of a sudden we're all
Yeah.
pissed off that somebody or some other group or something,
Hmm.
uh, and the way that can proliferate so quickly is scary. Yes. but the fact that things are decentralized, the way that you have said it is, I think, does it. That it makes way for, you know, a label like Skin Graft or someone that's been around for a long time like that, you know,
Mm.
um, because the playing field is becoming a bit more level. You know, I mean, a new pop star is discovered just through TikTok videos, you
Right.
know, and that sort of thing now. You know, it can really, it's not, you know, here's my demo on your desk,
Mhm.
right? Back in the
Mhm.
old days. So yeah, and I'm still, you know, I guess I don't really think about what other labels are doing because I'm so just concerned of trying to keep my own footing,
Mhm.
um, in a sort of ever changing environment, you know, because like I said, just, you know, just doing this record up as opposed to doing one 10 years ago, it's very, very different, you know, just going out to, you know, I worked my first solo record, I worked that thing completely on my own as far as all the promo and all the PR and all that stuff goes. And I did pretty well with it. Like it got pretty far. I made money from it, you know. It got a good amount of reviews. It got some good write-ups in some major magazines and you know, Macy's ended up using one of the tracks for like an internet commercial for Fashion Week. You know, so I was able to do that on my own still, but now, I started going out just trying to find people to review, like bloggers and stuff, trying to review my new record, and everybody wants to get paid.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Joe Schmo blogger wants you to buy an ad on his fucking blog, and it's like, for one thing, man, if I'm gonna pay you to review my record, how can I fucking even trust your review,
Yeah.
you know?
Totally.
I
Totally.
kid you not, I came upon some sites, I wish I could remember the sites, I wish I had written them down. I was appalled, so I just dismissed them. I went through because some of these sites you wanna get reviewed, you're trying to get a review, right? They give you,
Mm.
like, a form to fill out. I'm filling out this whole form, it's tedious, I'm going through all this crap, I fill it out, you get to the end, there's, like, premium reviews and standard reviews, different price tiers. There was a premium review that was, like, $30 or something like that.
Mhm.
Then there was the standard, which was free. So I clicked on standard, and then a window popped up that says, "Sorry, we don't offer standard reviews."
So why have the option?
Yeah, I mean, it was like this. I was like speechless. I was shaking my head. I just like, you got what?
Yeah.
What were we are truly in the idiocracy. You know, it
Mhm.
was really, it was very, very disheartening. Um,
Totally. Yeah.
and I kept going. I kept, you know, I found a few places but it was not going to be I was not going to get very far at all on
Mm.
my own. And then Dan from Discipline PR wrote me out of the blue and said, "Hey, you know, we see that you're launching your record and stuff, and I think we could help you out with it. You know, would you be interested?" And I just wrote back and said, "Man, there's no way I can afford it. You know, I can't afford to pay for PR on my own." And he wrote back with a price that was very reasonable. And I said, okay, well, yeah, let's try this. You know, let's try it. It's better than having a bunch of records just sitting around my house. You know, that are not moving. So, um, yeah. So, you know, I believe that's how I got connected with you. Is
Yeah, I've
through
been with
him.
Dan. I've been working with Dan for. He's been very kind to the site. I mean, we've been. I started this in like September 22, and he's been, kind of. We've been like back and forth since. And yeah, he's great. I love Dan. I think he's
Yeah, yeah.
really
So
great guy.
I'm going the PR route now, and hoping that you know I can at least get some decent press for the record that will help me sell more, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I sold out. I pressed 300 of my first one and I sold out of it. It took a couple of years to sell all 300, but I sold
Hmm.
out of it. And I still sell digital copies every now and then. Um, so I know I have those fans out there, but as far as like getting their attention now and locating them and stuff, wow, it's much harder.
Yeah. Actually, let's talk about the album. So you mentioned the title. It's Be Fantastic. It's been out on digital now, but it's coming out on the 17th on physical. The album takes your four-track Drum Killer EP from I think about 4 years ago now at this point. It takes
2020, yeah.
yeah, it takes the tracks from that, rearranges them, and then adds a bunch of new ones. I actually, the first thing I wanted to ask simply was actually about the kind of the rearrangement of the tracks as they appeared on the EP because did you find that Did you find that because as I'm listening as I listen to the record, and I don't know if this was your intent or not, if this was just my interpretation as I read it as I was listening to it, but as I listened to the album as a whole, it felt to me less like individual tracks and more as different movements of the same overall piece. That's my feeling. So when you kind of rearrange the track listing like that, what does that do to the overall piece?
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that because that's how I composed it, you know?
Yeah.
I really looked at it as one piece, one whole piece. Um, and of course, there's these individual movements within that, you know? But yeah, and then, you know, I love old movie soundtracks, not just old movie soundtracks, but I mean, you know, movies from the 40s to the present, really. I love soundtracks.
Mm,
And the weirder the better too. And I started kind of getting it in my mind that I was, you know, making a soundtrack to a movie that has never been made.
mhm,
And that's nothing really new for me. I mean, we thought that way a lot when I was in Ladio Balaco, because we were an all instrumental band, and you know, our music always had just a natural cinematic quality to it.
mhm.
And that's kind of what happens when I make my own music as well. And part of it is because it's instrumental. Um, Part of it is because I love soundtracks, and uh, and part of it is because I'm trying to because I'm not telling a story with language, at least with a spoken language in that way. I'm trying to tell a story with a musical language, you know. So the fact that you heard it that way, I really that's awesome because that's you know, and I've got it kind of bookended, you know, it kind of starts and ends very similar, and you know, the record is at 45 RPM, the
Mhm.
LP, which for maximum fidelity. um, But it's really cool because you can also play it at 33, and it sounds wicked at
Yeah.
33. I mean, it really does, man. It's like you're on fucking Quaaludes or something, you know, or you got really, really way too high, you know? It's awesome. But also, you could start it on side 2 or side 1 because the way that side 2 ends is the way that side 1 starts
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
And so you can listen to them from side 2 to side 1 or side 1 to side 2. You can listen to it at 45 or 33. It's pretty interesting. Some of
Did you
that was by
consider
chance. I'm
sorry,
sorry?
did you consider not labeling them as side one or side two and let the listener kind of just accidentally stumble on which version they began with?
You know, I did not know because I had a real specific order for it in my head. It wasn't until after the fact that had some time to remove myself from it that I
Mhm,
started noticing, like, oh, wow, it's got this, it's cohesive in these other manners as well, you know.
mhm.
But yeah, no, I had a real definite, you know, order for it. And that's one thing that, you know, once I got all the pieces done, it took me weeks just playing around with the overall order of things and shuffling things around. And then I would realize that, like, you know, after looking at it in the macro as a kind of a whole composition, I would realize that there was still something lacking. And then I would
Mhm.
need to go back into the micro and make a new piece, a new movement. And then, because I'll stick this here and that. Okay, now it works, you know, that kind of thing. So
Totally.
uh, I really like the idea of zooming in and zooming out.
Mhm.
Going between the micro and macro is the way that I do any major project, you know. And
Do you like collage work by any chance?
I, I mean, my music is a little bit collagey in a way, but I guess I haven't done. No, I'm not doing anything deliberately like in a collage sort of format or anything like that.
Oh, sure. I just meant, are you more so, are you a fan of that kind of style of art?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. I love, you know. I mean, there was a thing that they call it plunderphonics, right? Where
Mhm.
you're sort of taking things that are familiar in a way, and you're rearranging and you're deconstructing. You're doing, you know,
Yeah.
um, yeah. I mean, I think that's a very postmodern sort of way of creating art, right? Is just rearranging things that were already there. you
Mhm.
know? Um, I do that. I just do it with my own pieces, like, the initial ideas that I'm drawing from are my own though, and not other people. But yeah, I look at it that way, or I think about the way that, like, William Burroughs would write, with the cut up techniques and things like that,
Mhm.
and shuffling things around. And I do that when I'm sometimes thinking about arrangements or rhythm ideas. Just say you've got, that's the concept of based on my book too. How I wrote my book is based on combinations and permutations.
Yeah.
Like if you have A B C, you also have ACB,
Yeah.
and then BAC, BCA, and then CAB and CBA. You've got all these, and just moving those around, all of a sudden it's like, wow, like there's a lot of information there. So that's just definitely one of my techniques as far as composing and creating.
Actually, I heard you when you were talking about your book, The Book of Rhythm. When you were talking about when you kind of made that, because if I'm correct, it was kind of compiled of various notes you took in note you'd made in notebooks over the years, and when you kind of came down to like crafting it as like a cohesive text, as you were mentioning, you were mentioned that you kind of got new appreciation for the form of literature and how kind of sentences flow together, and how you kind of how chapters flow, and just like how kind of like making a larger text like a 240-page book kind of your appreciation of it now. But I was wondering, in crafting that book, how do you think that's changed um you as a listener of music, and in turn as a musician, or has it?
I don't know if it's changed my listening. It's just opened up more possibility
Right.
in general.
Mhm.
I've never drawn any lines in the sand when it came to music. I always knew, like, just random guitar players are always like, dude, I never play with pedals. Like
Mhm.
it's cheating. Or people that use a fucking million pedals. And I just always thought, like, who cares?
Yeah.
Just do whatever makes the music that you want to make. Like, I don't, they're all tools, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm sorry. What was your question? I lost
No,
the.
I was just wondering, it had creating that book and like studying for that book, and kind of like expanding your listener, expanding what you'd
Oh,
listen
right.
to in order to kind of craft that book. Did it change you as a listener, and as a musician by expansion?
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, it didn't change me as a listener. I wouldn't say. Um, yeah, it changed me as a musician though. Just again, like I mentioned, realizing the possibilities. And like I was saying, I don't draw lines in the sand. I've always been open to, like, well, hey, I don't know, let's try it. Like
Hmm.
the question, what if, when used in a creative way, is one of the greatest questions you can ever ask. Like, hey, what if we tried
Yeah,
this?
yeah,
Like, I mean, shit, man, anything goes.
yeah.
Anything goes, right? So it opened me up in that way. It also allowed me to become even more organized though, because I had to organize all of that. And how I organized, because there's over 5,000 rhythms in order, meaning, like, as far as how they progress in a bar line, how they progress as number of beats and all that, it's in mathematical order, the whole book.
Mhm.
How do you do that? Well, there's a lot of subsets. First you're just looking at a group of three. There's only six possibilities there.
Mhm.
If we take out the grouping of three as one of them. When you go to four, there's 14. When you go to five, there's, what is there, like 30, and then
Mhm.
you get to six, and there's 62. And um, you know, there's these the initial big set. So let's say there's 62 rhythms, that you got to come up with. But then there's all these little subsets. Like, I'm not just going to do like six. I got to do 5 and 1 and 4 and 2 and 3 and 3, and then, you know, 2 and 4 and 1 and 5. And then you start splitting them up into all of these subtexts in a way. Again,
Mhm.
it's about going into the micro more and more, and
Right.
then zooming out to the macro, right? So it's the way that you do any large task, you do a little bit every day and you stay in that for a while, and then you pull back out and you go, "Oh, okay, now I see how much I've completed already,"
It can
So
seem ceaseless when you're getting that atomic about it.
it seems ceaseless.
Can it seem ceaseless when you're getting that atomic when you're in the middle of what you're
Oh,
doing?
yeah. Yeah,
Mhm,
well, 'cause I mean, I stopped at 12 beats because just in 12 beats, there are 4,094
mhm,
rhythmic combinations, okay?
mhm.
Just within the basic rhythm there. If I were to I was thinking about doing 16 beats, which would have been a 4/4 measure of 16th notes. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and
Mhm.
those 16 spaces, there's over 100,000 rhythmic possibilities there, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just with that. So, and once I found I kind of, I don't know, created my own algorithm, I guess you could say. I mean, I didn't really set out to do that, but it was that's where I ended up. Um, Once I saw what the method was for generating the rhythms and how to
Mhm.
do it in order, it was like turning on a faucet.
Okay.
I could do it. I mean, I could do it endlessly now. And so it did obsess me in the way that, like, I would see this kind of stuff in my sleep sometimes. I would have a hard time sleeping because I would see numbers and grids and,
Mm.
that sort of thing in my sleep, but it would drive me nuts because 'cause I'd be trying to figure things out. I would be trying to problem solve when I should have been sleeping, you
Right.
know?
It reminds
And
me actually, as you're describing that, I don't know if you've ever seen the Darren Aronofsky film Pi, but I'm kind of getting flashbacks to that film as you're
it
describing this.
yes, it is it was very akin to like a scene, something like that. It's very cinematic,
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but once I was done and I had gotten it all out of me and gotten it in order and everything, then after a while, like, my mind quieted down,
Yeah.
But in the middle of that for 14 months, it was really, really, really intense for a while. But
What's
it was my way of dealing with a lot of things that were going on, a lot of tumult that was going on in our country at the time, in this country at the time,
mm,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah, because it came out, I believe, around 2019. So yeah, you can kind of imagine what was happening around that time. Which
Yeah.
actually now I think that we're seeing a bit of a parallel lately as you and I are speaking. It's ironically it's September 11th, but yesterday there was a pretty big debate we don't have to get into, but it is kind of like when you're kind of making a project like that, did you go in with kind of like what's there a particular catalyst for the book, or was it something that you were just kind of, I don't know, trying to extrapolate and see what happened? What's there kind of an overall um I don't know, I guess kind of like purpose for what you were doing? Was there kind of any kind of like declaration you were trying to make, or what was kind of the purpose where you're just pulling that thread and see what you ended up with, or
Well, I'd always like, I always wanted to do a solo record. I'd always wanted to write a book
Mhm,
also. I just felt there was something in there, and so the book that I set out to write initially was not the book that became the Book of Rhythm. So,
mhm,
initially, I was just gonna write, like, a very personal, like, my method, how I
mhm,
got from A to Z kinda thing. Like, if you're interested in my drumming style, I'm gonna give you all the elements that helped create the style that I have, or something along those lines, right? It was
mhm.
gonna be more that with maybe a little bit of, sprinkle of, like, little autobiographical tidbits in there. I still might do a book like that that's a bit of drumming and autobiography, and, kinda going into, background on not just the patterns and rhythms, but what I did with them and why, and maybe like, "Oh, you can hear it on certain
Yeah.
examples of certain songs," that kinda stuff, I might still do that in the future. Um, so I initially started writing a book like that, and but I was also just sitting down with a notebook and writing.
Mhm,
Rhythmically, but just starting to write. I would just take anything, like, take something I know and write it down and look at it, some everyday rudiment, like a paradiddle, a
mhm,
very the very first rudiment that anybody knows typically. Write it down, look at it, think about all the different things you could do with it. I started doing things like that. At one point, I think it was my wife that came across the mathematical formula for permutations and combinations, to where if like if you had, let's say you've got 10 spaces, how many variations, how many permutations or combinations can you make out of those 10 spaces, right?
Mhm.
Once I knew what the number was mathematically, I could then try to get to it. What would happen is I would end up a couple short sometimes out of like hundreds, and I'd be like, "Oh,
Yeah.
fuck, how do I?" And
Yeah.
it was like a needle in a haystack. So what I did though, and this is how I figured out my system of patterning, is I had to go back and find where the mistake was. So I'm going over each individual rhythm, and I'm
Mhm.
looking, and eventually I would see where there was some sort of jump where I left something out of the patterning, and it
Mhm.
it was hunting for those mistakes that allowed me to then see the system of patterning that I was actually developing.
Mhm.
And once I recognized that, like I said, it was like turning a faucet on. I was like, "Oh my god, I could do this with." Oh my god, like I found it.
Yeah.
I found it. And the fact that no one had ever done that before. No one had ever made a book like that, ever. There's no
Mhm.
collection of rhythm like mine ever in
Mhm.
history that we've come across. And I've researched my ass off, and so as a
Yeah, I was
lawyer,
just gonna
as a
ask where
music
you
writer.
cross-referencing with other, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, because I mean, I had to know before I put all the money and time into sinking this. I was like, "Did anybody do this? Did
Right.
somebody beat?" They had to have beat me to this. Somebody had to have done this.
Yeah.
Because the information is in the universe there. I just collected it and organized it and then put it out there, right? Which is quite a feat, but it no one had done it before. It was crazy. I was surprised and of course relieved, but I was surprised. I was nervous as hell, man, that somebody was going to beat me to this because sometimes when a certain thing kind of gets into the zeitgeist, it's like, oh shit, sometimes it happens and there's multiple people doing the same thing, right?
Mhm.
You
Yeah, it's like
know,
a chain reaction kinda thing.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, you've been very great for your time. I'll try not to take up too much more. I just had a couple of questions actually about the production of the record. The album is, if I'm correct, is self-produced. I was wondering because one thing my research kind of came up short in is your history with production. Yeah, I mean, when did you kind of like get into producing yourself? And generally, how do you find production to be a kind of separate thing to songwriting, or do you find production to be an extension of the songwriting?
For me, because I'm not writing songs with a verbal language, I
Mhm.
find the production and the songwriting to be one and the same.
Right.
Uh, you
Because
know,
there's a lot
the,
of soundscape on your record. There's a lot of additional instrumentation, and I think those are very crucial to the kind of overall atmosphere of the piece.
yeah, I really want to create a world and have you enter that world and
Yep.
stay in that world
Mhm.
and be glad that you did.
Right. Yeah.
Ideally, okay?
Yeah.
Um, with Ladio Balaco, that's when I started getting into production because that's what we did. We made our own albums. We did it
Mhm.
ourselves. We started looking at the cost of going to a studio. We were living in New York City at the time. We were looking at the cost of really going into any studio back in the mid to late 90s, 96, 97. And for 2 days in the studio, we could go just buy a digital recorder and a board, which at that time it was a DA-38, a
Mhm.
Tascam DA-38, which was like a big deal, man. We were like, "Oh my god, eight tracks digital," you know? There was no editing of it. I mean,
Yeah.
there was some editing, but it was real, real raw. There's no
Mhm.
screen or anything. There's no waveforms, right?
Mhm.
And so, yeah, we got a board, we got a digital recorder, we had a few shitty mics, and our normal band equipment, our amps and guitars and drums, and we just started recording in our practice space.
Yeah.
Um, we did all of our records ourselves in Ladio Blocco. And the first one, especially compared to the other two, they sound very different from each other. So we were really experimenting and we were really trying to expand, our palette of what we could do production wise. Um, and that's when I first really started thinking about it and getting into it. Around that same time, this is the late 90s. I'm living in New York City. I also started interning at a big studio there at the time called
Mhm.
Loho Studios, which was on Ludlow. I'm sorry, on Clinton Street, not Ludlow. It was on Clinton Street in the Lower East Side. The Blue Man Group ended up buying it eventually and
Okay.
taking it over. I don't know if they're still the current owners. They might be. Um, but I started interning at the studio. I knew the owner, and yeah, I was around mics and tape machines, and I was rolling cable and soldering and answering phones and making coffee and cleaning toilets, and then getting to bring in my own sessions on some off hours. They were really cool. They were very hands on with me in that way.
Mhm.
um so yeah, I was in my 20s, and I just started recording my own stuff in Ladio Vallejo. We were doing it, and then I had a few friends that I would bring into the studio and help them like record some demos because I had access to this amazing. I mean, it had a Neve board, it had a huge sound room, I mean, yeah, huge live room. It was a great place. Um, and with this band that I had after that I don't talk about much, I had this band called Electric Turn to Me,
Mhm.
uh, and we made our own records as well, except for a final LP that we made that never came out. But we finished it; it just never came out. Typical story.
Yep.
Spent all this money, and it's kind of it's a cool record too. I really hope to see it surface one of these days because that band. I don't know. I didn't really wasn't a huge fan of the band that I was in at that time. I was kind of searching for myself a little bit. But looking back now, having had a 20 years distance from that, every now and then I'll listen to that. It'll come up in my car, and I'll be like, "Oh shit, that's pretty decent, actually. That's some
Yeah.
weird shit. That's pretty cool." And I'm glad for that. But really, since Dazzling Killmen, overall, most of the stuff that I did that I was involved with, as far as like that were my own bands or my own projects, we were doing most of the recording on our own. So,
Mhm.
I've been doing that for off and on, almost 30 years, not quite, but
Yep.
almost.
Well, yeah, I mean the album Face of Collapse was famously produced by or engineered by the late great Steve Albini. I was wondering, did you kind of like observe when working with external producers, did you observe what they were doing, their kind of patterns, or was it again just something that you learned on the job as the other projects came about?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely learned a lot from Steve. That one of the things that I learned from him that would probably be the most profound to me was just learning how to tune the drums because he was a
Mhm.
master at that. I mean, he could, there's a reason that his drum sound is the way that it is. It's not just because of where he puts the mics. Obviously, he works with the great drummers. Look, Dave Grohl, Mac McNeely, people like that have got great drum sounds.
Mhm.
Um, but it's also because Steve was probably tuning those drums himself most of the time, and he could make them sound like fucking explosive cannons.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, there's
Which is funny because he famously started working with drum tracks initially. Remember, like with Big Black and stuff like that. It wasn't until I think Rape Man that he started working with actual in
an
his
actual
projects. That
drummer.
is, obviously he's been recording for other people too. But yeah, it's kind of crazy that like the band that he got a lot of seniority in didn't even have a drummer.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I think that as far as how I learned, most of it was just out of necessity and learning on the job. And I
Hmm.
picked up stuff from everybody. Another guy that I picked up a lot from, Artie Smith.
Hmm.
Artie is dead now. Artie Smith was the East Coast instrument guru. He's the guy that, like, when Madonna comes to town, Radiohead comes to town, and they need the fucking vintage amps and guitars and these vintage drum sets and shit. You call Artie,
Hmm.
and he would show up, and he would tune the drums for you. he never fucking hit the drums when he tuned them. He tuned them all. I had full conversations when I was lucky enough to have him on a couple sessions that I was doing where he came in to tune the drums. It's all by feel. He's just feeling. It's all tension. He's all feeling the tension.
Mhm.
That's what I really, really learned. I learned a lot from Steve initially, and I took what I learned from Steve, combined it with what I learned from Artie. I'm good at tuning drums now. I've done it. I used to do it a lot for Sean Lennon's studio. I was taking care of his drum equipment for quite a while. And I've gotten really good at doing it. I'm very happy with the drum sounds that I get. And part of it is I know how to hit the drums, but I also really know how to tune them. And
Mhm.
again, Artie Smith, man, that guy was a fucking genius. And there'll be a lot of people on this podcast that probably won't know who he is. If there's any New York musicians that have been around for a while, they will have heard of Artie because he was a legend. And
Mhm.
he literally would have these full crazy on conversations with you, and then he would go boom and hit it once, and it was done. And you would like piss yourself. It was insane. It was
Yeah.
completely unreal. It was. And we're like, okay, that was done there. And he had this like crazy, like really thick, kind of like New Jersey, sort of Brooklyn-y
Yeah.
kind of accent. He was a total character, loved to talk, fucking great guy. But he tuned based just on feeling the tension, and that's primarily how I tune now. I do
Mhm.
do a little bit as matching tones just at the very end, but it's all tension based. And you can feel it with your hands, So anyway, I'm making a long answer to that, but I picked up stuff, you know, like any good student, right? I've tried to be a sponge in anything that I've done as far as absorbing information.
Mhm.
Uh, Yeah, and it's been mainly just by necessity of having to do my own stuff because we couldn't afford to do it otherwise, most of the time as well. Um, yeah, yeah, and then that's how I continue to do it because that's the only way I can make records when I wanna make them, uh, very humbly with my own equipment. But since I am doing it very humbly with my own equipment, I gotta make it sound amazing.
Mhm.
I have an Mbox. I mean, I have no fancy preamps. I have an Mbox 2. That's the preamp you're hearing, and then I've used the 4-track as a preamp for distortion.
Yeah.
That's it. When I made that record, all the drums are 1 or 2 microphones. That's it,
Mhm.
literally. But, thinking about the production coinciding with the songwriting, I make sure the sound of the drums sound the way that I want them to sound before it ever goes down to quote unquote tape, even
Right.
though it's not tape anymore for me. Um, I really want them to sound that way in the room. I need to get them sounding as far as the tuning goes and as far as the gain stage goes and the
Mhm.
placement of the mic. The tuning, the gain stage, and the placement, man, that's such a huge color palette right there between just those three variables. Those are my three main colors in a way that are variables that I work with.
Do you think like kind of working perhaps with kind of like fancier equipment and fancier studios, it kind of distracts from the kind of meat and potatoes kind of important elements that you're kind of talking about in terms of like the placement, in terms of the tension, in terms of like trying to get the sound you want. People get more focused on I don't know, kind of like switching equipment or kind of trying new things in that sense, rather than I don't know, just trying to nail down like the sound in its pure sense, I guess.
Yeah, I would, if I had the opportunity to do my own solo stuff in a quote unquote real studio in that way,
Hmm.
um, at the center of it is still what I do with my sound. But if I could have that and just give it an additional hi-fi element to it, really put you inside of the drums more. That's how I would use that in that way. I can, it wouldn't necessarily have to be something that could detract or detour, even though obviously that can happen because but the same thing happens just with Pro Tools. People, fuck, man, with their laptops, people will just twiddle for a lifetime and never commit to
Totally,
something, right?
totally.
Um, so I don't know if there'd be that much difference. I think that there's a difference in the high end sometimes, this air quality, this clarity, this that you can only get sometimes from certain microphones, or, and I just do my best to try to get that with the equipment that I have, and that's one thing, like, I know I've gotten better because I remixed the tracks that were on Drumkilla. When I put them on and rearranged them for the Beat Fantastic, I remixed them,
Mhm.
and I went back and I was like, damn, I can really make this sound a lot better now than I did. So just in those few years, I really had gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
So it's all just a work in progress.
Well, actually, I'm not sure if you still do, but I know at least at one point you were teaching students. So I was wondering, like, do you find, like, as someone who's kind of like doing doing music as kind of a didactic practice, do you find that it's still important from your perspective to still be learning and still be challenging yourself? Because I think people shouldn't be satisfied that they have full knowledge in anything, I guess.
Oh, I mean, absolutely. I mean, just looking at the drumming community specifically right now, I mean, it's insane the amount of techniques that you're starting to see from the youngest kids nowadays. Like, just
Mm.
drum videos are like, I gotta stop watching them to some degree, because sometimes I'm like, man, fuck, I don't know what I'm doing here. Sometimes I feel like a hack. You know,
Hmm.
but I say that, I mean, half serious for sure, but
Sure.
I also say that and go, I'm not, because I have my own thing, and that's the only thing that kind of keeps me going right now. Is I got a sound, I got a voice, I do on the instrument,
Yeah.
and I don't try to play like everybody else. There's a real movement happening in drumming right now. I mean, it's so, my God, everybody's got chops out the ass. I mean, like, it used to be those guys like Vinny Colaiuta, and that was Vinny Colaiuta, but now fucking everybody's Vinny Colaiuta. It's insane. It's like, what
Yeah.
the fuck? I mean, it's like, you know, but I tend to like people more like say like Louis Cole,
Hmm.
right? Like, who's just really creative, very popular stuff, but he's also very creative about it.
Right.
Um, there is a way to do both. I mean, there are people that are doing both. Um, but what was your initial question again? I'm sorry.
I actually forget myself now.
That's okay. It's been a
No,
little.
actually, sorry. I remember. I was asking. Do you find it's important, not to be satisfied with your own extent of
Right.
knowledge?
100%, 100%. Because Miles Davis, from the time that I was a little kid and got turned on to him, has been my all-time favorite musician.
Mhm.
Just the breadth of his work, and the depth, and oh my God, just the innovation. And I love Miles so much, and his bands and his records and all that.
Yeah.
And he was always looking forward, always, 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 never wanting to settle, never wanting to like just be like, all right, I'm cool, I made it. He's Miles Davis. He could have stopped in the fucking 60s and would have been still a legend,
Yeah.
right? But then he goes on into the 70s, and we have all those records from 70 to 75, right? He's
Mhm.
junked out of his mind, right? But that's amazing music. And then he comes back and he's doing like Cyndi Lauper covers and shit, and Michael Jackson covers and stuff. I mean, he never stopped. He never stopped.
Mhm.
And I've always tried to tell myself that that's how I want to be as well. It's not always easy to be that way sometimes, because sometimes because life is hard,
Mhm.
and you get worn out. You
Yeah.
get worn out. And sometimes you just want to fucking eat a burrito and watch TV or something, and tune out, right? But
Mm.
that's not really, I can't do that for too long. And so I'm always trying to push forward, because, I'm a perpetual student, and I have a son who's coming up on being 12, and I want to influence him in these ways too. That, like, man, you just, and that he is, I mean, he's an information monster. He's,
Mhm.
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
There's always something to learn. There's always something to to notice, I mean, and that's the one thing too, is like, I stop and smell the roses. Like, I see all the beautiful things around me. I notice. I try to notice the small things. So between being a perpetual student and having time to notice the small things, I'm hoping that I'm setting myself up for contentment as I get older,
Mhm.
when it comes to like just life paths and life decisions. Like I want to be that kind of person. And so that's the kind of person I've always been. At least that's the kind of person I've always tried to be because I've felt that way since I've been really young. And it was from the influence of Miles Davis and hearing him talk about music, and always moving forward and never sitting. Because the moment that you sit on your laurels and you think like, man, I'm the shit. Well, you are definitely not the shit.
Mhm.
And you're not the shit anyway. No one's the shit. Because
Yeah,
there's always somebody who's better, and there's no better, and that's a whole big kind of dumb game anyway that we get into is quantifying ourselves, as human beings and
totally.
stuff. Like,
Especially also like with musicians, because like every couple of years, Rolling Stone is like, here's the 500 top musicians, and it's like, okay.
yeah, yeah, and that's not a that's not a place where art and music really thrives.
Yeah.
That's more just our need to compartmentalize as humans.
Yeah, to kind of quantify, and as you're mentioning, to kind of list, to give a listicle and kind of just like, have a reference point where you can go, hey, this person's number 230 or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess one final thing I just want to ask, just kind of based on what you're saying there, is um, now as a solo performer, do you find, compared to say working as a larger collective, you get to kind of dictate your own sense of work and recreation, your own kind of relationship to that? Because I get the sense from talking to you that like you don't like to I don't know, to rest for too long, because I kind of get it too, where I feel like if you take too much time out, you start feeling like a piece of shit almost, where you're like, oh man, I really need to be doing stuff. Like you can't just sit around for too long inactive. It just kind of drives you insane. So I was wondering, do you find that now to be kind of beneficial to kind of be able to set your own kind of like work or recreational schedule, or how does that differ, I guess, to working with like three other guys or whatever?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that in a way because, the 14 months that I had taken off of social media, I'm still doing all the stuff that I normally do
Hmm.
that I like normally would just like let people know about on social media. Like, hey, look at me and I'm doing blah blah blah. Blah. I'm still working, I'm still doing stuff, but I'm just not sharing with everybody. I'm working with people in the immediate. If you're there and I'm talking to you, then then you're aware of what's happening, right?
Right.
But I started to have these thoughts of like, do I exist anymore?
Yeah.
Do people feel like what happened to him? Where'd he go? And it's like, I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm just not playing that game. I my whole thing was for my own sanity was to carve out a 90s existence again.
Hmm.
The 1990s. If somebody wanted to call you, they could fucking leave a message if you didn't answer the phone. They could leave a message. I'll give you that. But this whole like, immediacy that everybody feels is like, you're supposed to be available
Right.
24/7, and there's this immediacy to everything that is done,
Yeah.
as far as communication goes, like, I can't live that way. That's not good for me, I'm real sensitive to stuff like that, so,
Yeah.
I took that time off, and I was wondering, yeah, it's like, does a tree make a sound in the woods if there's no one there to hear it? Like, I was
Hmm.
thinking about those sort of things in terms of being an artist and social media, and I also wondered about, like, when I come back, because I knew I was going to have to come back, because I got stuff I'm trying to sell you motherfuckers,
Hmm.
like,
Totally.
I got
Totally.
I'm selling my wares here,
Yeah.
records and books, and drum lessons too, all
Sunday,
that.
Sunday, Sunday.
That's right, that's right. Um, I knew I was gonna have to go back onto social media at some point because it's great for that as an independent artist,
Mhm.
but during that time, yeah, I was really having some philosophical sort of questions and wondering if when I did come back, would anybody even care anymore? Would I have screwed myself? Did I lose all the momentum that I had back when I was doing it for years in a row, right?
Mhm.
And what I found is, nah, it's still the same shit. It was the same, it was doing my record and raising the money was more difficult this time around. But as far as like the response of people like being there and being like, hey, there's still some people here and the number of likes, quote unquote, like on my posts and all that kind of crap. Um, it seemed to be the same as when I was doing it 14 months before that. It didn't seem like those 14 months didn't really do anything that detrimental for me in terms of my audience or social media.
Mhm.
If anything, it was probably beneficial because it allowed me to get my head back together so I
Right.
could then post some content that would be digestible in some way, Um, but yeah, and again, I've forgotten your question. I'm usually not this bad. I gotta say, my son has been home sick the last couple of days, and I've been promoting and uh, packaging up records. I've been
Yeah.
like
No, no, absolutely not.
swamped, and so my mind is a little fractured.
No,
It's in a few
so
different places. I apologize, and I've been, I smoke too much pot too sometimes. There's always that, but anyway, um, yeah, I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, to be honest.
yeah. No, no, I guess one final thing, I'd say just one final thing. I keep saying one final thing, but I
No,
just
hey man,
every time.
I'm here to promote, so whatever you got.
Well, one thing I was thinking about, like, is just kind of based on what you were saying, and this is probably a little overtly cynical on my part, but I was thinking about like what you were saying there about like kind of people constantly needing to have posts out and stuff like that, and the cynical part of my brain is thinking like at one point when we used to create art, like books or albums or films or anything is on the one hand I think a lot of it was part of some wanted to be part of some kind of greater canon of fine art, but I think at the other hand a lot of artists work was sort of dictated by documentation of their life in a way. It's like, oh yeah, that was the guy who wrote Leo Tolstoy. You know what I mean? Like that's like this is who he is, and he wrote these books, and it's sort of a way of kind of living longer than your actual lifetime.
Mhm.
I was wondering, do you find, and again this could just be me reaching, but do you find that like Instagram posts and Twitter posts and YouTube videos and things like that are sort of more quick ephemeral ways of trying to document the fact that you existed?
For me, a vinyl record is the most profound way to do that
Hmm.
because those other things could disappear instantly.
Sure.
If you don't melt that record or scratch the hell out of it like a screwdriver or something, or just try to like break it in half, if you just
Hmm.
kind of leave it, it lasts forever almost.
Yeah.
Sorry, environment, but so I see those digital files. I mean, that's why I had to put out an album.
Hmm.
I've done some other digital releases, and it's like it gets you through those
Hmm.
times, and it's something, but it doesn't feel as real to me.
Right.
Um, and so this is my way of trying to extend my life in that way, to live on, um, to put out a physical product like this. I don't have that trust or that feeling at all in the internet. I mean, that shit's here today, gone tomorrow.
Right. Right.
It's so fucking vulnerable, it's so volatile. I don't put any real credence into that. But
Mhm.
a record, I mean, that shit, like, this is crazy. And this is a friend of mine. It was horrible. His house burned down. He
Mhm.
was he was gone. Um, while he was gone, his house burned down. He lost almost everything. He sent me a picture. My first solo record was one of the only things that like really survived.
Mhm.
He had other records that melted. Records would melt and stuff, but I'm saying like unless you have something really catastrophic happen, the fucking record's still gonna be there. Now,
Yeah.
whether we got something to play it on, I don't
Yeah.
know, right?
Yeah. Totally.
But I don't put a lot of stock into digital files. That's why I don't do like you'll never find I mean, I won't say never, but I probably will in this case. You'll never find my solo work on Spotify.
Mhm.
They're not artist friendly. Fuck you.
Mhm.
Will I use Spotify myself? Hell yeah. You want to
Yeah.
put your stuff up there for me to consume? Hell yeah, dude. I'm a music lover. I'm going to consume it.
Yeah.
But am I going to give you my stuff? You got to go to somewhere like Bandcamp that's more artist friendly.
Yeah. Does it piss you off then as an artist to see kind of like other musicians who do put their stuff out on Spotify getting shortchanged and then like Spotify pouring millions into like podcasts?
Yeah, I mean Yeah, I mean, it's like MTV that used to show music videos and then
Hmm.
became reality TV. I mean, now Spotify was all about music, and now it's like, now it's like the podcast hub.
Spotify as a podcaster is Spotify's Jersey Shore.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. So again, will I use it as a tool for myself to consume
Hmm.
and consume music? Yes. Will I allow my own now work from other bands that I've been in? Some of that's up there because the labels have put it up there, whatever. But my own work that I have absolute control over, it doesn't go up there.
Hmm.
I've thought about it, and then I'm like, why? I just
Yeah.
don't. There's no point, And if all of us artists do that, how are we going to educate like the kids to go like, no, no, there's alternatives.
Hmm.
Check out places like Bandcamp, other platforms that are more artist friendly, and plus you can discover so many more interesting artists because man, there's so much going on there,
Hmm.
and not just by these fucking, payola. That's what Spotify is with these fucking playlists.
Hmm.
It's the same thing as like it was back in the 50s,
Yeah, totally,
late
totally
50s,
pay to
early
play.
yeah, with Dick Clark and Alan Freed, the whole payola scandals, right?
Hmm.
Spotify's the same damn thing. Companies are paying to get artists on these stupid Hey, like I see young bands posting. They're all excited because they got on a playlist. I feel
Yeah,
bad for them.
yeah,
I feel sad that really
yeah.
that's where it's at right now. Like it's just oh man, it's like virtual sex or something. It's fucking tease. It's just not real, you know?
Hey, there's
Yeah,
money in that too, man.
yeah, you know? So I'm yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, that's why I make records,
Yeah.
when
And
whenever I can.
thanks very much for your time, Blake. You've been very, very gracious. Is there anything you'd like to add or plug or anything for a wrap up? Obviously, the physical release comes out September 17th. Book of Rhythm is out now on all good from all
Yeah.
good retailers and the bad ones too.
There's my website is blakethedrummer.com.
Hmm.
You can pre-order the Beat Fantastic there. You
It'll
can
probably be
order
out by the time this goes up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, you
Yeah.
you can purchase the Beat Fantastic LP there. You can order the Book of Rhythm there. Um, I teach online drum lessons. I teach students all over the world because I do it online. They're live. It's just like a regular drum lesson, except
Hmm.
we do it via video platforms. Um,
Is there ever actually, sorry, just when doing virtual drum lessons, is there ever
yeah.
issues with connectivity or, things getting out of sync?
Right, that's the only issue, if there are any issues, if somebody is having issues with the speed of their internet. Yeah.
Hmm.
As long as the speed is which, I mean, pretty much everybody has pretty fast, smooth internet nowadays,
Hmm.
there's no issues. It's really like teaching an in-person lesson, except the person is on their own drum set or drum, equipment or whatever. Um, but yeah, yeah. So yeah, it's blakethedrummer.com. My Bandcamp site is blakefleming.bandcamp.com. Um, and yeah, you can get the Beat Fantastic there. I will say too, right now I have the Beat Fantastic on my Bandcamp site for free. You can pay what you want. Um, Download it and then listen to it on a platform that allows you to listen to it seamlessly without any interruption between tracks. Because a lot of the tracks on the Beat Fantastic cut or crossfade into each
Yeah.
other,
Hmm.
and Bandcamp inserts a little space between the tracks if you listen through Bandcamp, so don't do that.
Yeah.
And other than that, order the LP, download the digital version, and buy a copy of the Book of Rhythm. Take a drum lesson. Give me all your money. That's it.
Yeah. If you don't have a drum kit, you can just do it on cushions.
That's right. Oh, I mean, man, I've done these over the phone. Yeah, you really just need, I mean, we can work with just hands. We don't even need sticks, work on rhythmic coordination and that kind of stuff. But Yeah, I think that's all I have to plug.
Perfect. Thanks very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Aaron, thank you so much. It's a pleasure meeting you and talking with you. I
Perfect.
appreciate it.
Can you hear me? Can you see me?
I can't see you, but I can hear you just fine.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm just parked outside of a McDonald's somewhere in Tennessee.
Okay.
Hi,
Yeah.
sorry for minutes late. I uh,
No, no, it's all good.
I couldn't download the Zoom app while driving, so
No
yeah,
worries. So, could you, man? How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Yeah, just driving from a gig in Louisville to Americana Fest in Nashville right now.
Okay, cool. What's it like actually kind of being back on the road in the US? I mean, does it feel like kind of I don't know, does it feel like home, or are you kind of more used to the narrowness of the European cities?
Oof, I don't know. What do you mean by narrowness? Do you mean
Well,
the urban
comparatively,
structure
do you not think
or mindset?
European cities are much more narrow, or roads in general are much more narrow?
Ah, yeah, you're talking about like actual urban structure
Sorry, can you hear me? Okay?
city where you could walk everywhere, uh, and you could
Sorry, you
take
kind of
mass.
cut out for me there. Can you hear me? Okay,
I can hear you. You can't hear
perfect.
me?
No, you just cut out there. I can hear you now. Fine. Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, we'll have to blame it on the McDonald's Wi-Fi.
Oh,
Um,
perfect.
no, but I definitely prefer living in a European city where you could walk everywhere and take mass transit
Yeah.
on a structural level. And I definitely prefer living in countries where, yeah, the rich have to pay more taxes and there's socialized medicine. That's
Hmm.
pretty awesome. But when it comes to the way people treat each other on the street, even though it might be a little superficial sometimes over here, I do definitely prefer the way like strangers talk to each other here on
Hmm.
average. I think that people are a little bit more optimistic and outward, like just easier to engage with, especially in the South when people
Hmm.
aren't pissed about politics. But aside from that, people are nice, and I really miss that. And I mean, Europeans are nice too once you get to know them. It's just that on average, like when you are walking down the streets of Europe, people aren't necessarily um, super friendly.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah,
no, and I suppose like yeah, because um, I don't know what the reason for that is. I get what you're saying, but yeah, I think it's I don't know. A lot of times, like, 'cause I grew like I live in Dublin, and sometimes like
oh,
on the streets here, it's kind of like uh, people kind of feel that Dublin, in comparison to the rest of Ireland, is pretty standoffish and less friendly.
yeah,
But I was saying, I try to explain to people, it's like, well, it's more kind of a case of if someone's kind of coming up to you in the city, like you don't know what their
skeptical.
intent is.
Yeah, no, you're used to people asking you for something,
Well, it's not
and
even that. It's just like sometimes it actually can be dangerous, and you're always like
yeah,
a little weary, you know?
yeah, parts of Dublin are rough. I mean, I love Dublin, but yeah, it
Yeah,
could be
no, totally.
pretty scary. Libertines or whatever, or the
Yes,
Liberty, yeah,
liberties. Yep.
Libertines, shit.
There are a lot of libertines around there.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, Dublin's awesome. No, but yeah, I find Ireland to be a lot more like the US though when it comes
Yeah, I
to the way
agree.
people act compared to mainland Europe. Um, yeah, I really like it there. I haven't been there in years though. I have some friends over there. A good friend of mine is playing drums for Glenn Hansard right now. And I
Oh,
was hanging
sweet.
out with him and Glenn in Chicago just last week when they played support for Pearl Jam. That
Oh,
was
wow.
awesome. I was really happy to see them doing that. They're so great. Glenn's awesome. And yeah, my old friend Tim, his drummer, is just a sweetheart. So yeah, Ireland's very close to my heart.
When you mentioned that Ireland was more similar to kind of the US, I agreed more so actually in terms of I think a lot of our kind of structure and the way our country is probably a little more similar to the US than a lot of mainstream Europe, in the sense that as you were
Totally.
kind of like hinting at. I think Ireland is a capitalist shithole, much like the US, more so than a lot of our European counterparts. I think that is kind of, as you were mentioning, I think like if I'm correct, like part of your reason for even coming to Europe in the first place was kind of dealing with that kind of economic system, which was, just very harsh and cruel. And I think that's unfortunately what we kind of have here compared to a lot more of the kind of more socialized opportunities on the mainland.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. I mean, Ireland, since its inception, has always kind of been influenced by the United States, like as you know. And
Mhm.
I mean, I find that most of my Irish friends know so much about their history, a lot more than a lot of mainland Europeans. I feel like a lot of people are more, um, yeah, they subscribe more to being Irish than most of my Austrian or German friends subscribe to being Austrian or German. There's not really much national pride that has a lot to
Mhm.
do with the Second World War. And you guys, like, I feel like the concept of national identity, at least it manifesting itself as a like nation state, is just so much younger and so much more fresh. Um, and I feel like, yeah, in that regard, it's more American as well, like in
Mhm.
one's relationship to their national identity, for better or worse. Sometimes it could be blinding, as you see with
Mhm.
Trump support in the US. But yeah, yeah, it can also be good in a way. Sometimes I feel like, in my experience of being an immigrant in um, Germany and Austria, due to the fact that there isn't that much pride in being German and Austrian among like all of my liberal friends, it actually becomes almost harder to become German Austrian because like no one wants to be that. So like it's hard to find what it is
Right.
uh, because
Y-
like it's kind of been commandeered by the right wing. And if you, yeah, try to do things that are like nationalistic or considered German or Austrian, most people associate that with right wing politics.
Right.
And that puts you in a pretty weird position as an immigrant trying to fit into the culture.
Yeah, I think there's I think in the European continent there's a lot more emphasis, and I could be wrong on this. You probably actually know more about this than I would, but I think there's a lot more emphasis on kind of pan-Europeanism of kind of almost European federalism in a way. I think there's very like across Europe there's varying opinions on European federalism. Some nations are more supportive of it than others, but I think actually you're now seeing a rejection of that on a on a wide scale. And unfortunately, I think that's leading in places like Sweden, the Netherlands, Italy, and indeed even Ireland, although here it's not really in electoral politics just yet, thankfully. But and also Germany recently, you're seeing like a rise in kind of far right politics and that kind of
Yeah,
ultra nationalism, essentially neo fascism in a lot of ways, is
absolutely.
starting to raise its ugly head. Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, do you see that like from your time in Europe or
absolutely.
um?
But I do also see counter movements to that. I feel like there are different different directions that different social groups are going in Europe because like among a lot of my friends they would much prefer to be European or have more of like a European federal structure, especially when it comes to like economics and
Mhm.
like a more unified military. um, and I think that a lot of people surprisingly like on the left are in more support of that, like this entity that's above national identity, this entity that's more of a union, um,
Right.
as yeah, which could essentially kind of maybe hold its own against the United States and against China and against Russia.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of these right wing movements, yeah, are kind of retroactive in their thinking and are also funded by Russia. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, like, you see them kind of want to splinter off and do their own thing. And I mean, you also, at the same time, there's like so much hypocrisy in some of them because, like, you look at Viktor Orban and all these places like Hungary or former right wing Poland, even though it's gotten more liberal now
Mhm.
governmentally, which is great. But like, there's such this double standard where they still get billions of dollars from the EU, but yeah, they say that they're not part of it or don't want to subscribe to being part of that. They're just kind of trying to reap the benefits of it while not actually investing in the idea
Right.
uh, and the union of it. And that's what all these right-wing political movements do. And this entire manifestation of this right-wing neo-fascist movement is really to, yeah, just make short-term economic gains for the people that are directly involved on the top of the economic hierarchy of these different states, or even the people outside who are funding them. But yeah, I mean, it reminds me a lot of different things that have happened in the history, especially of Eastern Europe. Like you look at what happened to, yeah, the Czech Republic or Czechoslovakia after the First World War. Like they wanted to have some level of independence from the Austro-Hungarian Empire for 100 years or more. And yeah, they were told many times by the Habsburg administration that, like, yeah, you could separate, but next week you're going to be under Russian occupation. That's exactly what happened. And so, like, that's going to happen too with the European Union if these right-wing movements do have some success in splintering them off of the union itself. But
Right.
yeah, but we're not here for a political podcast.
No, I'm enjoying it actually, to be honest. I'm like, yeah, yeah. I mean, like I've had criticisms of it too. I mean, I guess ultimately I'm pro EU, but I do have issues with it too, where it's to me actually it seems too exclusionary. That's my
Oh
complaint. I
yeah,
mean, I know some people think it's like quite kumbaya, but for example, like I've had coworkers, from like South American countries, particularly Venezuela and Chile, as well as Argentina, but not as many who've, couldn't live here. But then I
yeah.
have friends from places like Belgium and Latvia, and it's like, yeah, you guys could stay here. It just seems to me like a weird form of kind of I don't know, white supremacy or something like that, or just like I don't know, just
Well, I mean, it is another in group. Like,
exactly, yeah.
so, I mean, it
So
might not
that
be
is my
in
criticism too,
nation.
from a kind of more left-leaning position, I guess.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. Um, but yeah, I yeah, I don't know where I stand on that as someone who really fought to get EU citizenship and finally
Yeah.
got it. Like I understand that it can't just be open to anyone who walks in the door.
Hmm.
Because like, yeah, some of the privileges that you have living in the EU, when it comes to the social state, like they can't continue to exist if millions and millions of people waltz in every year who aren't bringing any money or education.
Hmm.
Uh, and especially if they don't subscribe to the same value set of respecting women or like respecting democracy. So it's just not going to be a very feasible project for very long uh,
Yeah.
if the floodgates are completely open to, yeah, people who might not, yeah, want to see it perpetuated on an ideological level, but only want to benefit from it on an economic level. Not to say that everyone should be excluded. I think that there should be a clear path to living there legally.
Hmm.
Because even for me, being a straight white dude from a Western country, it was hard. So I can't imagine how insanely difficult it would be coming from, yeah, an underprivileged situation with a different religious or racial background. Um, but yeah, I think one of the main problems beyond all the structural stuff is the identity itself. It's so, it's not defined, and the left is very apprehensive to define it because in defining the value set of the in group, then you make an out group and you make it exclusionary in a way.
Hmm.
And in this, like, yeah,
I
yeah,
suppose like true left-wing politics, so it's I guess through its logical conclusions actually against hierarchical structures in general, but you kind of can't have the EU without some level of hierarchy. It's a very I
it's
don't
a
know.
technical machine. Yeah,
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
one thing I want to ask, kind of based on something you were saying, and I'll get off politics in a moment, but it's an interesting
I
discussion, I think.
studied politics. I like talking about this stuff, but
Yeah, no, I don't mind either. It's just, I don't want to make it too much about politics if but you were kind of mentioning the sort of with the kind of rise of the far right, we are also seeing a kind of counter reaction, which is a lot of kids going further left, which I think is a great thing. And sometimes people make a false equivalence that, oh, being far left or being far right is equally bad. It's like, well, no, I'd much rather live under a far left system than a far right one personally. But do you think people are kind of people today are kind of getting, whether it's in the US or whether it's in any European country or wherever, are kind of getting dissatisfied with the sort of milquetoast status quo of conservatism and liberalism as being the kind of the only way you can express yourself, and people do want to kind of expand out and want something more. And in fact, I think in a lot of ways it is kind of in different directions. It is kind of a criticism of the kind of neoliberal capitalism that again we were kind of critiquing earlier, you know?
yeah. I mean, I definitely see dissatisfaction in every country that I go to,
Yeah.
in the EU and in North America. There's deep dissatisfaction, um, and I think that it's rooted, yeah, in all the things that we talked about. But I think that it goes even more deep. I think that there's a certain spiritual depravity that comes with like the materialism that we've, yeah, essentially made our religion,
Hmm.
um, for the last, fuck, I mean, 100 years or more
Hmm.
in some places, especially the US, where like the religion is essentially capitalism. Like this
Right.
is what it is. It's like this free market, consumer capitalist ideology that perpetuates everything.
Hmm.
Um,
Especially after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 91.
yeah,
It's like the only system in town now.
yeah, and I think that there's an emptiness in that people, like, essentially with consumer capitalism, it is completely predicated upon people feeling a void that they have to fill.
Hmm.
And like the society both creates that void and makes it as deep as possible, so people feel this extreme depth that they have to fill with just junk,
Hmm.
whether it be the junk of buying another car or the junk of, yeah, some insane political ideology that, yeah, somehow justifies that void. Like, yeah, it's very, very strange. I think that there's just this giant feeling of emptiness, and beyond that, I think that a lot of our problems right now are based on extreme class division, and
Hmm.
a lot of people deep down knowing that they don't have to work as much as they are right now, um, and get paid as little as they are right now. Like, it
Hmm.
doesn't make sense. Like,
Right.
you don't have to be doing this. Um, and like, there are definitely other ways that we could structure our society, but it's almost like reached this Orwellian level to where like we even lack the vocabulary or lack the um, imagination to even, like, yeah, start to think about a potentially different system, a
Hmm.
potentially different way of doing things. I mean, even when you look at the gross disparity between what Donald Trump represents and what Kamala Harris represents, um, like, of course, there's some fundamentally different things, and
Hmm.
I would I wouldn't vote for Donald Trump if he held a gun to my head, but like, there are, I would say that there are more things that they agree on and that they would do than differences.
Hmm.
And it's still about the perpetuation of a consumer capitalist economy and a perpetuation of the same economic hierarchy that's there.
Well,
Uh, so yeah, I think that people are frustrated by that, and um, yeah, they express that frustration in ways that still fit into the system, which is crazy. Like, I don't see anything that's really like shaking the foundation of what this is. Like, it's not like we have real, like a real quote unquote threat of Marxist ideology. Like,
Mm.
there's none of that. Like, even if you look at a candidate in the US like Bernie Sanders, um, like, that's not Marxism. That's not like trying to, I mean, it's at least not communism or socialism. Of course,
Mhm.
there's some ideas in there, but like, that's not like what we saw at the turn of the last century, where like there were millions and millions of people, like a large amount of some countries who were um, calling for and fighting for like a complete fundamental, um, yeah, shift in the economy and in the ideology of people and the structure. And you don't see that now. Like, people are just, yeah, talking about changes that would stay in the system. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it's just what it is right now.
Mhm.
Like, there's no call for a fundamental change. Um, I see that anyway. I mean, there are definitely smaller movements, especially in Germany right now, and maybe some like anarcho movements, like Christian anarchists and stuff like that in the US, that like are just completely off the grid, but none of
Mm.
them pose a legitimate, um, once again, quote unquote, threat to the foundation of the society or economy.
I agree with that, and also, I mean, Bernie is playing within the kind of mainstream sort of political system, the mainstream kind of two-party system, I guess. One thing I think actually, as an outsider looking at American politics, with no real skin in the game, I mean, what happens in the United States doesn't fundamentally change my life all the way in Ireland, I guess, but I guess it has
Well,
a knock-on
if they
effect.
pull out of NATO, then it would.
Exactly. Yeah.
But besides, yeah,
Yeah. But one thing I noticed kind of like you were mentioning kind of the Bernie Sanders movement, and one thing that I thought was very interesting about that is I think in some ways the United States has kind of moved, or at least for the younger generations, kind of moved past the kind of McCarthy era Red Scare, and has kind of embraced labels like socialism, which are pretty, over here pretty tame. Like the call yourself a socialist here is actually a pretty tame label. I know in the United States for, the 20th century at least, it was kind of like it was almost like calling yourself a Nazi. It was like bad.
I mean, there was a
W
very strong PR campaign for the last like
exactly.
4 generations. I mean, socialism and progressive politics were like huge in the US
Mhm.
through the latter half of the 19th century and the first 3 or 4 decades of the last century. I mean, there were socialist governors, there were socialist congressmen. It was a huge movement, but yeah, the wind of that movement, um, yeah, it was taken out of the sails of that movement by FDR moving the Democratic Party to the left a little bit with the WPA projects in the 1930s. And then, yeah, immediately after that, this McCarthy era of criminalizing this movement. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that to a certain extent, it has been that fear has been debunked among most moderate Americans.
Hmm.
But yeah, there are people on the right that are trying really, really hard to, yeah, blow that word out of proportion and misuse it as much as possible. I mean, they're calling Biden a socialist or a Marxist.
Yeah.
Like, that's like calling Ronald Reagan a communist.
Yeah.
Because like the political spectrum in the United States has moved so far to the right by these guys,
Hmm.
that it's also taken the Democratic Party to the right. I mean, what the Democratic Party is today is essentially what the Republican Party was in the 1980s.
Hmm.
Like, it's insane. There is no real representation of the left here. And to call Harris or Biden communist, God, that's like calling me a Republican.
But one
Jesus.
thing I think is really great about that was like actually you know I think the seeds have been kind of sowed for kind of more left-leaning kids, and what I think was great was one of my critiques of American politics. I don't know if you think this is a fair critique or not, but one of my critiques that I think there's so much kind of cult of personality of American politicians, which unfortunately I see now seeping in over here too, so I can't be too sanctimonious about it. But one
Yeah,
thing I loved was that you know, these kids that kind of were radicalized, whatever extent you want to use that term, by the Sanders movement in like 2016 and on. Once they were dissatisfied with his position on Palestine and with Gaza, they kind of turned on him, and to me, it kind of reminded me of the only time I ever saw kind of a grassroots kind of popular thing like that again in my lifetime was during the 2008 20 and 2012 presidential elections when Ron Paul was running as
yeah,
a libertarian, and there was
yeah,
this grassroots thing of libertarians. But then once Ron Paul was kind of out of the equation, libertarianism kind of stopped being cool or sexy or whatever. But
yeah.
socialism still persists as an ideology, it seems, and I think that's kind of positive. Do you have any opinion on that, or?
Well, I mean, socialism as a movement, I feel like has just a lot more street cred. I mean, it has like more. It actually benefits the people, whereas libertarianism is basically just complete hollow bullshit. It's
Mhm,
basically like some type of Goldwater version of republicanism from the late 60s. Like it's just small government, and it's completely naive to think that like by making the government smaller, corporations would just be like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, let's make the masses rich now because we
mhm,
don't have to pay taxes or have any laws that govern what we do to the environment. Like
mhm.
dumb.
Yeah.
um it's completely idealistic. Like it's the type of thing that looks good on paper, to
Mhm,
quote a bunch of idiots that say that about socialism. Like it's it doesn't have anything to offer, whereas socialism, like it has happened before. And I mean, like, not to say that it was always good. I mean, you see what happened with the Soviet Union, and it was
mhm,
commandeered by a fascist. I mean, yeah, Stalin was the worst thing that's ever happened to Marxist ideology, and
mhm,
he's given it a bad rap ever since. And also Mao, I mean, shit, like those programs that he did, like killed millions of people, and like to say that that's Marxism is insane. Like that was just complete totalitarianism.
mhm,
um so I could see why uh, many people are skeptical of yeah, leftist Marxist movements. um but yeah, there is a lot of Marxism that still holds our contemporary society in the West together. Like
mhm,
Bernie would always argue, like the fire department are the like street departments. Um, these are all socialist measures, and especially since this, yeah, since the 30s in the U.S. or since like Keynesian economics were kind of implemented throughout the West after the Second World War. Um, there's been a lot of socialism
mhm,
throughout the West. And it's the type of thing that either created or secured the middle class for the West for the last three generations. And yeah, it's been anti Keynesian measures since Thatcher and Reagan that have led us to a situation where we are now, where you have like, yeah, the vast majority of capital in our Western societies being controlled by 1% of the population, and the majority of people trying to scrape by working 2 to 3 jobs just to be able to pay for insurance.
yeah,
Like that's completely unnecessary. That is fundamentally unnecessary.
totally.
And it's just greed. And eventually, if it keeps up, people are going to get angry enough to actually do something about it. And then the rich, maybe then they'll make some concessions. But until they're afraid for their lives, they won't.
That's yeah, I can't disagree with anything you said there. I think everything you said is like completely sound. It actually kind of reminds me. I don't know again, like how much you know, kind of about. I'll try and get off this topic again. I'm kind of interested in this, but you know, kind of like with Irish politics when Ireland became a free state after succeeding
Yeah,
from Britain, there was kind of economic protectionism in this country, which kind of resulted in a failure because we're kind of like, you know, it was to try and create money into our local economy without being dependent upon foreign countries. But the problem was there just wasn't enough resource in the country for that really to be plausibility. And then when we got martial aid after the Second World War, they were like, okay, we'll give you the money, but it's not unconditional. And there was an adaptation of Keynesian economics, as you said, that kind of sort of the liberalization of kind of the Irish market, which people have actually over here in school is thought as like a positive thing. I guess it was is in the sense that it made us more affluent, but there was generally that kind of a lot of like industrialization and a lot of like urban sprawl and things like that, which um I don't know. I just thought I'd just add that in of that kind of like,
Yeah,
um the kind of chain reaction, I guess, of what you're kind of talking about.
yeah. Well, I
It's also
mean,
interesting here.
I'm the last one to say that like capitalism is all bad. It's given the Western world anyway, like a lot of physical comforts and
Sure.
longer life expectancy, um, many
But who
things.
does it come at the expense of is always the question,
Yeah, it's come at the expense of, yeah, probably about 1 to 200 years of labor struggle where
Mhm.
thousands of people fought and died for workers' rights, and it continues to come on the shoulders of the exploitation of the rest of the world. Um, when it, with cheap labor in third world countries and the complete decimation of the environment.
Yep.
So
Yep, totally.
that's another thing.
Yeah.
But
And I'm glad that people are kind of like aware of these things now. See, everyone seems to be a little more conscious about a lot of the things you're kind of discussing. And actually, one thing that this can kind of go into like a much deeper thing, but like if I'm correct, you kind of like move between Toronto, Missouri, and Vienna, kind of travel. Like you're very peripatetic. You're kind of constantly on the road, but I think those are primarily the kind of three hubs that you see. I mean,
yeah,
from seeing kind of you know American politics, Canadian politics, and I guess European politics in a broad sense. What do you think are the similarities, the commonalities, and what do you think are kind of the differences, and how does that kind of influence your art or your work, or even just the way you perceive the world?
when it comes to the politics influencing my work, that
Well,
one's
just
a
the
little bit
society in general and kind of what
back.
you're seeing.
But
I just
yeah,
sorry.
the society. Yeah, I mean, on a stylistic level, I was very influenced by growing up in a small town in Missouri. I mean, the first concert I went to was Garth Brooks. That was like,
Hmm.
I grew up on country music, grew up working every summer with my grandpa on the farm and working all the time with my dad as a carpenter. Like, I was a redneck, and I still am at heart. Like, I like going to stock car races and have go-karts and shit, like
Hmm.
shoot beer cans on my farm. Like, deep down, I'm still a little redneck. But yeah, my mom was diagnosed with cancer when I was really young and had it for 26 years. And I just saw like all that she went through when it came to just being lucky that she had worked at an insurance agency. And like, that's kind of what kept her alive. And if she was completely dependent on the state, then she would have died when I was a kid. And that was one of the first things that started to politicize me. And then when George W. Bush was elected, and like it was just so obvious uh, what they were doing was wrong when it comes to the invasion of Iraq and like just going behind people's backs, like in a United Nations, to do these things that were against international law. Like that kind of politicized me more.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, like so many things. But when I got to university, I started studying politics then, and then it just made it more and more clear that what the US on a governmental level was doing was just not right. Um,
Hmm.
like, and that it wasn't being publicized really. Like, the revolution's never televised. And so
Hmm.
like I would do these things where I would like go and protest the School of the Americas, which is this like military training facility where they train South American, yeah, paramilitary groups to overthrow democratically elected governments. I
Hmm.
go protest that. There'd be tens of thousands of people there that wouldn't make news. And I would all these kind of organized socialist group meetings and stuff like that. And it just all like it was a lost cause here. And I think that desperation and hopelessness and anger deeply influenced my early work as a musician. I wrote a lot about politics. And then I moved over to Europe, and that kind of pacified me a bit, because a lot of the things that I wanted here, they were already happening over there, like having a mass transit system or having socialized medicine. Like those were all things that I wanted the US to have, and I got over there and I had them. And that was one of the things that kind of depoliticized my music on a superficial level anyway. Like the ideology is still kind of there in the DNA of it all. It's just I'm not singing blatantly about, like, I don't know, yeah, like labor rights or something like that. Sure. And so, yeah, in moving over there, I feel like there's this general cynicism in mainland Europe, which was probably influenced by the wars, or maybe hundreds of years of struggle, whether it be through wars or whether it be through oligarchical structures and poverty, or maybe it's just a social thing, I don't know. But the cynicism definitely affected me, and my music got a lot darker, I would say, and also a lot more analytical and self-analytical, especially living in Vienna. Like my music took on more of a psychological turn, which growing up in a very avoidant, passive-aggressive, superficial Midwestern culture, you don't really get, you know? And so it took on a new depth, I would say, moving to Europe. And now moving to Canada, like, it's just a whole nother neoliberal situation. It's a real slap in the face on economic level, just because Toronto is just so unbearably expensive. It makes it really hard, because having lived in Germany and Austria for the last 15 years, that's one of the ways that I was able to get by as a musician, because like you could actually afford to be a middle-class musician there, because there's a social state. And there's some protections on rent. And
God, that would be nice.
At least in Vienna anyway, there's a lot of social housing. And in Toronto, it's just complete free market rule, which is very frustrating. Of course, there's some socialized medicine, but the Ontario provincial government's trying really hard to destroy it. So it just gets worse every year.
You also find, I think, again, like I've never been to Canada myself, but I watched like
Canada's awesome.
Yeah, I watch a lot of again, it's probably just a product of globalization, but I watch a lot of American television and films, and the way they always portray Canada as being this like beautiful socialist utopia where all your needs are exactly. That's the thing that annoyed me. I remember during, again, you mentioned the Bernie Sanders campaigns. For some reason, Ireland would sometimes get referenced, and the perception that Americans seem to have of Ireland was that it was a socialist society. It's like it's not at all. It's like there's really no social protection here at all. It's just like complete free market neoliberal BS. Do you find that perceptions, American perceptions, kind of tends to glamorize other countries that, like you said, have those kind of social safety
other
nets?
Western countries for sure. I mean, like most of the people I know, when I tell them that I've lived in Europe or that like I might move back or whatever, like 95%, at least most of the people I meet are kind of like slightly left-leaning liberals in Canada and the US. And 95% of them, when I say I've either lived there or I'm considering moving back, they say like, of course, if I had the opportunity, I would do the same thing. And like, there's absolutely a romanticization of the social system there. And like, I think even a lot of people think that there's more social cohesion, which
Hmm.
is like absolutely not true. Like
No.
Central Europe right now, like Austria and Germany, there's so much social tension
Hmm.
um, due to inflation and due to immigration and people not knowing how to handle that on a cultural level and on an economic level. And so there's like real tension, real strife. And yeah, for the last 16 years of me being over there off and on, people, especially in the US, like always think that European countries have things figured out better than here.
No, not at
It's
all.
not at all. Yeah, but I think that like, especially during George W. Bush's administration, um, there was a fundamental change in the way a lot of Americans perceive the US and perceive themselves as Americans. Like
Hmm.
we almost took on this like slight inferiority complex to some um, European and other Western countries concerning their social structure. Of
Hmm.
course, there are large swaths of the society on the right who, yeah, definitely don't feel that way and think that there shouldn't be a state at all
Hmm.
because they drank the Kool-Aid and have some type of social Stockholm syndrome where they associate themselves more with their oppressors than their class. So, yeah, there's
I
that.
have I have a question. Did you find when you moved to Austria as an American during the George Bush administration that there was any kind of presumptions made about you that your
Oh my
identity, your national
God,
identity was
yeah.
inherently political? And the other thing I
Pe-
just want to ask just before you answer that is to tag on to that. Did you notice any difference when Obama got in? Because I remember here
Totally,
anyway, when Obama got in, suddenly there was this kind of reevaluation of the American image, which I
totally.
I I, I want to be clear. I think American tourists that come abroad like are always under unnecessary scrutiny compared to people of any other nationality. Where you can
Yeah.
talk to people of any nationality and they can be quite oblivious or they can be quite educated on where they are. But for some reason with Americans, there's always just a presumption that they're apathetic about the location. I think a lot of that does come from the George W. Bush his kind of international relation where it seemed like he didn't care about anywhere else that wasn't the US.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, like, I have two things to say about that. So, when I
Hmm.
first moved to Austria in 2008, right before the election, um, and George W. Bush was still in office, I would literally apologize to people when I would meet them for being American. Um, and there was this general feeling that I got anyway of, yeah, being wrong and like having wronged the world. And like people, especially when they would find out that I'm from a small town in the middle of nowhere, America, they would, yeah, treat me different, kind of, yeah, be, yeah, unnecessarily cruel in a
Hmm.
way. Um, and I've found not only because of the Obama years, but also because Europe has gone so far to the right in the last 16 years that like the moral high ground that they had in 2008
Right.
has just completely fucking disintegrated. So
Hmm.
like yeah, if someone wants to tell me like, "Oh, look at how terrible your country is." I could so easily just turn it around on them
Yeah,
nowadays.
totally.
Almost every European country politically. So that's changed. Uh, and then what was the second thing I wanted to say? What was the second question you had, or second thought you had? You had
Well,
two.
yeah, it was kind of about the was being American in that era inherently a political identity because or
Ah,
was perceived to be.
yeah, yeah. So the other thing that I was thinking about is that the average person, I think not only European, but everywhere around the world, whether I go to South Africa or Japan or wherever,
Hmm.
like the average person thinks that they know a lot more about America than they actually do. Because, like you were saying, you watch American TV, you listen to
Hmm.
American bands, you've read American books. Um, that's what a lot of people do, especially in the Western world. And they think that they know so much about the US, even if they've never even been here,
Hmm.
or even if they've been here and they've been to like New York and
Hmm.
LA, which are, yes, part of the US, but definitely don't represent all 350 million people on a in a country that's like a couple times bigger than Europe.
Mhm.
So there's, yeah, people think that they know so much more. And one thing that I just started to do eventually is when I would introduce myself and they would ask me where I'm from, I would say that I'm from Missouri.
Mhm.
And the vast majority of the time, people wouldn't know where that was. They would ask, like, is that like what what state is that in? Or like they just would have no clue.
Right.
And that in itself would make it clear to them immediately that they know nothing about where I'm from.
Mhm.
They might have watched a TV show once, but that doesn't have, yeah, that maybe just has like a spark of reality in it, but definitely doesn't have the whole picture. And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean, the US is like so fragmented. I mean, I think culturally, obviously, it's in some ways, like it's a federalist country too. So obviously, there's going to be like local government and kind of uh, there's going to be differences in terms of the law. It's not like unitary countries like a lot of Europe is. I know, for example, Germany is federalist too, but most European countries are unitary. So it is just kind of like again, there was this kind of like joke going around that like the European mind can't comprehend this, and I sometimes think
yeah,
that's true. I think there's certain things where it's just like we're just too culturally divorced in a lot of areas to really grasp.
yeah. I mean, the European mind could definitely comprehend it if it comes over here and like lives here for a few years and travels
Yeah,
around it. Then absolutely. I've met so many Europeans that know more about the US than most Americans I know. And I've also met so many Americans that know more about Europe than most Europeans I know. So I mean, like it all depends on an individual's personal experience. Um, and unfortunately, most people just think that they know more than they actually do.
one thing I want to ask based on something you were saying there is, you were talking about when you went abroad as an American during the Bush administration that, you were kind of apologizing and trying to make clear that, look, my personal views are not in line with my government's. Do you see any kind of parallels now when you see states like Russia and Israel, which are under scrutiny now? Do you think that the individual kind of Russians, the individual Israelis are kind of presumed to automatically be agreeing with the actions of their state, or how do you kind of view that now in terms of what's going on now in Ukraine and what's going on now in Gaza?
I mean, those are two different things because the Israeli state is often associated with the entire cultural identity of Judaism and
Hmm.
religious identity, which is a very dangerous thing to
By
equate.
design, by the way.
Yeah, yeah, by design, by many people, many, um, yeah, anti-Semitic people. But
Hmm.
yeah, I do think that there are many people that assume that just automatically associate individuals with the state apparatus, which is one of the most terrible things that's come into existence since the French Revolution. I mean, this
Totally.
entire idea of nation state is what has led us to kill each other in the millions for the last 2 centuries. Um, and so, yeah, it's unfortunate. But
And
I,
also concepts like, for example, concepts like, someone being white or someone being Jewish or someone being Arabic. It's like these are additional things beyond nationalism too that are just like
yeah,
identities which divide us in a lot of ways.
yeah. And I mean, I think that in this age of, yeah, isolation and people just living on their phones and living on their computers and being divorced from actual real community and real human engagement.
Mhm.
We start to think and act like our computers. We start to see the world as a bunch of zeros and ones, and we don't see these things as the organic structures that they are, like the very differentiated, ever changing identities that individuals and groups are. So it's dangerous. It's really
Yeah.
dangerous when we overgeneralize. And like all the things that I've said now and all the things that I'm thinking right now are things that I've done myself and I occasionally do. And I always have to continually remind myself not to be that way, not to think that way. It's
Mhm.
hard. It's really, really hard. And everything I said here is really just my opinion based on what I've personally experienced. So I mean, like, I'm not right and I'm not wrong. It's just this, yeah, yeah, ever changing thing, and it's really, really complicated.
No, absolutely. I'll try not to talk too much about politics. I just want to actually get onto the album, but there's just one final thing I just want to ask because I am really interested in your perspective on a lot of these things. You're talking about I was wondering how do you kind of differentiate, or what do you see as the differences, I guess, between the MAGA right in the US and the far right neo-fascists that we're seeing now in Europe? What do you think are the, because I'm noticing some overlap and some distinguish some differences. So I was wondering, from your perspective, I mean, what do you think differentiates them, and what do you think are their similarities? And in general, do you think for people who are opposed to the kind of rise in the far right, do you think there's common factors we should look for?
Oh, that one's tough. I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap. I think that the main one being that they're predominantly, um, in my view, just kind of the death cries of patriarchy.
Mm,
I really think that both of them kind of grow out of this feeling among white people, I think, mostly, of like being taken over by minority groups and losing their identity. Um, and also like men, like
mhm.
this feeling of like, yeah, you see both of these movements lashing out against cancel culture and liberalism and like woke movements. Like their rallying cry is very often like being anti-woke.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think that they have that in common. Um,
With woke being quite a nebulous term that's
yeah,
seemingly can mean anything.
yeah, which is a perfect thing on an Orwellian level to just
Yeah.
like make the enemy so broad that anyone could associate that with
It just
whatever.
seems to me like the successor for the term political correctness, again, just a vague kind of nothing term that
Yeah,
it has some
but it's
connotation, but yeah, sorry,
working
good.
though. But it's working for them. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah. So I mean, I think that they have that in common. I think that there are some fundamental differences when it comes to um, the main group identities
Hmm.
in European countries and the US. So I think that even though the MAGA movement is very waspy, um, like it's still something that African Americans and Latin Americans
Yeah.
and even gays are like people in the LGBTQ community. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah, not to say any term that is offensive. I hope don't I
No,
don't
no.
mean that. But yeah, even people in that community, there are some that associate with the MAGA movement, and so like I do feel like it has a lot to do with this American hero worship around, yeah, the strong man. It has a lot to do with the way American national identity is different from European national identity. So I feel like American national identity is more of a patriotic identity that's more permeable,
Hmm.
where like a person could come in and as long as they subscribe to certain actions and ideas, they can too become American eventually.
Hmm.
And I feel like in most European countries, the group identity is predominantly predicated upon like ethnic or national identity instead of a
Yeah, it's
patriotic,
genetic. Hmm.
yeah, instead of a patriotic one. So
Hmm.
it's literally impossible for someone to become um, German or Austrian or Polish or whatever in
Sure.
the eyes of many Germans, Austrians, Poles. Um, of course, not everyone, but there's a large segment of society that would never accept a black person
Hmm.
as a Polish person
Right.
or accept a Muslim as a German or even in my personal experience being someone who speaks German and who has like studied German and Austrian history and politics and has been there for so long, um, Like, no matter what I do, I will never be Austrian or German in the eyes of a large portion of those societies. Um, and I think that that might be something that differentiates right-wing movements in Europe and the US. Like, in the US, maybe it's um, less of a racial thing, less of an ethnic thing. And in Europe, I do think it's more of a, racial white supremacist type of thing. Even though
Right.
there's definitely white supremacy in the MAGA movement.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Yeah, one
it's
thing actually I think is interesting too is I love Americans tend to kind of at least from what I've seen, kind of like tend to identify with their kind of ethnic background too. So a lot of people
yeah,
will identify as Italian or Irish or German or Swedish or
mm,
what have you.
yeah, yeah,
Even though like
absolutely.
in the countries themselves they would get quite annoyed by that. I actually never got annoyed by that, but even like here, like people kind of go, oh, they get annoyed at like Irish Americans who kind of identify with the label, but I never really cared to be honest. I was like, well,
Yeah,
I think it's quite endearing that they want to be, you know?
yeah. No, I mean, like, I've always found that interesting as well. My aunt got super into it. I mean, she traced us back to, like, yeah, Adam and Eve. She's even gone to Ireland. You probably met her at a pub sometime. She
Yeah.
was one of the people that you met. I also find it endearing that Americans are interested in that, and I'm
I
also
do too.
interested, but I don't always like believe every record that's found. I mean, to trace someone back that far is
Yeah.
pretty tough, since most of the records, at least for peasants, either didn't exist or were kept in some church that was burnt in some holy war at some point.
Yeah.
So
Actually, you know what? It was funny during the Irish Civil War, a records office got blown up, so a lot of records are just kind of gone
yeah,
prior to the Civil War.
yeah, yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, in Germany and Austria, it's, well, at least most of Central Europe anyway. A lot of them only go back to the 30 Years' War
Mm.
and like these different conflicts between Presbyterian, or not Presbyterians, but Protestants and Catholics.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Wouldn't know anything about that. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, right. No,
You've
but
been very sorry.
yeah, I need to get rolling kind of soon.
Yeah, I
Do you
know.
want to
You've
talk
been
at
very
all
gracious
about
with your
music?
time. I just want to ask about the music real quick. Sorry, we went on a huge tangent. I'll ask about the music real quick. So, your new album that's coming out in February is called "Go Gentle." The new single that's coming out on Friday, probably by the time this goes up, is called "Independence Day." I love this. Your previous album, your previous single rather. And this single kind of deal with the bereavement of your mother. You mentioned earlier that she had cancer. She sadly passed away last year, and truly condolences for that. I'm really, through listening to your music, I mean, I really get the kind of hurt and the pain that caused. Um, Generally, is the album as a complete piece dealing with the topic of bereavement. Yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely all of that. Every song on the record is about that. It was my way of, yeah, forcing myself to confront it, because
mm,
like I didn't want to really think about it, and I didn't really want to have to continually deal with this, but I feel like the only way that I would, which I think our society should do more often, because we're so avoidant of even thinking and talking about death, which I think is extremely unhealthy.
mm,
Um, and I'm also to blame uh, in my daily life. Like, I wrote these songs and perform them now and release them now as a way of, yeah, not only dealing with it myself and making it all real and kind of accepting it truly and fully, and also just remembering her and memorializing her in a way, but also as a way of kind of bringing the topic up with people, and like trying to make people feel okay with talking about um, loss and grief. Like, because if we don't, then it's really toxic. Like, we
mm,
live in a we live a lie essentially. And I think that, to get back to something that we talked earlier, it just increases that void that we feel, and this lack of connection to our souls, this lack of spirituality in contemporary society, and a healthy one, not some cult-like thing, but like just a relationship to ourselves and who we are, and to the people that we truly love, and still love. So yeah, all these songs are about losing my mom, and yeah, what that feels like, what that means. And yeah, it's been tough, to say the
I
least.
can I can imagine. I'll try not to keep it too long. I just want to ask one thing. So, I mean, you've been making music now for a long time. I was wondering, when you have something like that is serious about like the finality of death, and obviously, I mean, at least in, I guess, the kind of material world, I mean, whatever your perception is of what happens after death is your opinion. But
Yeah,
when we talk about the
I don't
finality,
view it. I don't view it as final. I mean, there's a lot on this album that actually is talking about the opposite of the finality of death, not in the sense of like the classic Christian idea of heaven per se,
Mhm,
but more so that, like, yeah, I truly feel that my mom is still in me and with
mhm,
me, and yeah, as like who I've become. I mean, her actions and her love and who she was still shape me and all of my actions today. And I still, yeah, she still lives on inside of me through that. And I mean, just like in my DNA, like I wouldn't physically exist if it weren't for her. And so, like, I feel like there's so much evidence of her existence and her continued existence in me and in the people that she's loved. Um, and I'm not talking about heaven or hell or any of that. I'm just talking about like reality. Like she's really here, um, in that sense. I know that she's not physically here and she can't continue to make the same type of decisions or actions, like, or to act as she once did. But I don't view it as final. I view her existence as just something that changed.
well, Ian, thanks very much. I won't keep you any longer. I want to say thank you for talking to me. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Even went on a
Yeah,
huge
man.
tangent.
No,
um,
no, it's fun. Let's get a Guinness sometime in Dublin.
oh yeah, if you want to come on when when the record comes out, I'd love to.
Yeah, yeah. I'd love to come over. I haven't been in a decade or more. I played at Whelan's to like 10 friends, and that was the last time I played
I
in
love Whelan's,
Ireland.
man. I love
Yeah, me
Whelan's.
too. Me too. I love Dublin. I miss it. Yeah. I
Ah,
have some friends over there. We go to the Fumbly. Those guys are great.
actually, we're hitting the road before this. You're playing across the states and across Europe too. So
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
playing a handful of little shows this fall around North America, and then maybe a couple in the US early next year, and then I have a full tour in March and April through Germany and Austria. And so, yeah,
let's pop
I'd
along
love
to
to come
those
to
if you're
Ireland.
around.
Yeah, yeah. Let me know if you know any places, any bookers. Then
Oh
I
yeah,
think,
if you would like help with that, I could help you out
yeah,
definitely.
totally.
Right.
This is it's a tough time being a musician, man. It's really
Yeah.
hard. I'm gonna start a Kickstarter campaign in 2 weeks to help fund the record, but
Oh, you're doing
yeah,
a physical release or is it all digital?
no, it's physical too.
Cool.
Vinyl and CD and T-shirts. I'm going to go pick up the T-shirts now. That's why I have to rush because the place closes in an hour. I'm
Oh
rushing
shit.
down to
Oh
rushing down to
shit.
Nashville to pick up these
Oh dude,
T-shirts
you
designed by a friend of mine who's designed like a bunch of shirts for Gillian Welch and stuff like that.
oh
I'm really
sick.
excited. So yeah, hopefully I get there in time.
Shit man, don't let me keep you, man. Enjoy the rest of your day and thanks for the chat.
Yeah, it was great talking to you, man. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
See ya.
Bye. Thank you for listening to that episode of Post-burnout.com interviews. We're an independent venture run by yours truly, and as I said at the beginning, liking, rating, subscribing, and sharing really helps us out a lot. If you're feeling extra generous, we do have a PayPal donation link in the episode description, but don't feel obligated, of course. We've also begun releasing occasional exclusive episodes on Spotify, so subscribe there if you'd be interested in hearing those. Thanks again for listening, and see you next time.